Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free e-library, http://royalib.com. All books by the author, http://royalib.com/author/Bylinin_Sergius.html. The same book in other formats, http://royalib.com/book/Bylinin_Sergei//tankavoe_Gini_Pod_Rovino_1941_G.html. Enjoy reading. Sergei Bylinin. Tank Battle Under the Fords, Exactly. 1941. Introduction. In the first weeks of the Great Patriotic War, when the German tank wedges of the army groups, center and north, closed the pincers near Minsk and rushed to Smolensk and Pskov, aiming at Moscow and Leningrad, on our southwestern front, reflecting the blows of the German army group, south, a grandiose tank battle unfolded. The largest in the history of World War II, and the first tank battle of the Great Patriotic War took place on June 22 to July 10, 1941, and was a clear evidence of the high offensive activity of the Soviet troops, their desire to wrest the initiative from the hands of the enemy, which he seized as a result of an unexpected attack. This battle is little covered in memoirs, and in military history works it is usually referred to as battles near Brody or simply border battles. However, it was by no means an ordinary event and not a private operation. The battle unfolded in several western regions of Ukraine, in a huge pentagon between the cities of Lutsk, Rovno, Ostrog, Kamenets, Brody, with the center in Dubno. About 2,500 Soviet and German tanks met in oncoming battles. Its outcome had a significant impact on the disruption of the plans of the German command for the lightning crushing of the Red Army in the south. The breakthrough of the German troops on the move to Kiev was thwarted. The encirclement and destruction of the troops of the southwestern front and the capture of the industrial regions of Ukraine did not take place on schedule. In this paper, the battle is considered from the point of view of the initial decisions of the Soviet and German high commands, which determined the course and results of the first tank battle. We want, as far as possible, to show the general course of the battle, the clash of ideas and plans, operational tactical decisions and initiatives of the Soviet and German commanders of formations and units that took part in the battle. Ideas, plans, decisions. The plan of Germany's attack on the USSR and the plan of defense of the Soviet side were worked out and approved in their final versions almost simultaneously, and this is no coincidence. The coincidence in time is explained by the ever-increasing tension in the world, caused by the successes of Germany at the beginning of World War II, December 1940 to January 1941. In Moscow, the Soviet leadership held a meeting with military leaders and operational games, and a little earlier in Berlin, a similar meeting and games were held by the Nazi leadership of Germany. The aforementioned plans were the result of them. The German plan, Barbarossa, Directive No. 21, formulated the general goal: the main forces of the Russians, located in Western Russia, must be destroyed in operations, by means of deep rapid advancement of tank wedges. The retreat of combat-ready enemy troops to the wide expanses of Russian territory must be prevented. German strategists, in accordance with the military doctrine of the Blitzkrieg, made the main bet on the use of tank and mechanized formations. Army Group South, operating south of the Pripyat marshes, was tasked with, through concentric strikes, having the main forces on the flanks, destroy the Russian troops stationed in Ukraine even before the latter reached the Dnieper. To this end, the main blow is delivered from the Lublin region in the general direction to Kiev. According to F. Paulus, one of the authors of the plan, a participant in the meeting and the head of the games, 2 amendments were included in the final version of actions in Ukraine. Hitler demanded that the Russians be surrounded by coverage from the north, and Halder ordered tank wedges to prevent the Russians from retreating and creating defenses west of the Dnieper. Based on these instructions, the headquarters of Army Group South, Commander Field Marshal von Rundstedt, developed an offensive plan, Scheme 1. Scheme 1. The plan of the German offensive north, Army Group Center, and south, Army Group South, of the Pripyat marshes. His plan, with an enveloping blow from the Pripyat swamps to Kiev, and then turning south along the Dnieper, to surround the main forces of the southwestern front, cutting off the communications of the southern front, and with an auxiliary blow to Lvov, and further, to close the Soviet troops in a ring on the right bank Ukraine. The exit to Kiev was planned in 3 to 4 days, the encirclement in 7 to 8 days. The offensive zone for tank and motorized divisions in the direction of the main attack was chosen with particular care. German generals were attracted by the regions of Rivne, Lutsk, Dubno, where forests along the river Gorin interspersed with flat fields, and the plain stretched to the southwest, from Rivne and Dubno, and to the northwest, to Lutsk. From the south, this area, quite open and quite suitable for tank operations, was protected by forests, and in the north, by the Poleskaya, or Pripyat, swampy lowland with almost complete impassability. It is not surprising that the main German attack, originally planned for Lvov, was moved to this zone. The main roads from the border to Novograd-Volynski, Rovno, and further to Zhytomyr and Kiev passed along it. Army Group South deployed along the line of Lublin, the mouth of the Danube, 780 kilometers. At the turn of Vlodava, Przemysl were the 6th and 17th Field Armies of Field Marshal Ryukina and General Stulpnagel, as well as the 1st Panzer Group, 1st Tank Group, of General Kleist. The Hungarian Corps advanced to the border with Czechoslovakia and Hungary. 3 more armies, 11th German, 3rd and 4th Romanian, occupied a line along the Prut and Danube rivers, Scheme 2. The 6th Ryukina Army and Kleist's 1st TGR were tasked with attacking the Russians from Vlodava to Kristinopol and breaking through to the Dnieper through Vladimir Volynski, Sokol, Dubno in cooperation with the 17th Army. Therefore, Rundstedt concentrated shock tank and motorized divisions in the Ustalag, Sokol, Kristianopol sector, creating here, at the junction of the 5th and 6th Soviet armies, 3 and even 5-fold superiority in forces and means. The German 6th Field Army had 12 divisions, the Kleist Tank Group, 3 motorized corps, 3rd, 14th and 48th, which included 5 tank divisions, 9th, 11th, 13th, 14th TH and 16th, and 4 motorized, 16th, 25th, SS Viking and SS Life Standard Adolf Hitler. In total, there were 57 divisions in Army Group South. They were supported by the 4th Air Fleet of General Dorr, 1,300 aircraft. On the night of June 18, Rundstedt began to advance divisions to the waiting and starting areas, which for infantry divisions were 7 to 20 kilometers from the border, and for tank divisions, 20 to 30 kilometers. The promotion ended on June 21. The starting positions were located closer to the border and were occupied on the night of June 22. The Germans managed to reach them by 3 o'clock in the morning. On the evening of June 21, the commanders of the prepared German formations received a conditional password, the Legend of the Heroes. Wotan. Neckar 15, the signal for the attack, transmitted at 4 o'clock in the morning. On the night of June 21 to 22, the commander of the 48th Motorized Corps reported to Rundstedt, Sokol is not darkened. The Russians equipped their pillboxes in full light. They don't seem to be doing anything. German soldiers crossed the Soviet border in Galicia on June 22, 1941. On June 22, 1941, at 4 a.m., Rundstedt launched a simultaneous artillery and air attack and at 4:15 a.m. moved the infantry divisions. Around 9 o'clock, Kleist began to commit tank divisions to the battles. On June 22, Alder wrote in his diary, "The offensive of our troops was a complete surprise for the enemy units, Soviet. Orf, were taken by surprise in the barracks, the planes stood at the airfields, covered with tarpaulin, the advanced units, suddenly attacked, asked the command what to do. After the initial tetanus, the enemy proceeded to hostilities." F. Halder. Military Diary. Volume 3, Book 1. The Soviet leadership was convinced that a military clash with German fascism was inevitable as early as the mid-1930s. And was maintained despite the non-aggression pact concluded with Germany in 1939. As Hitler's aggressiveness increased, the Soviet government took measures to strengthen the defense capability of the USSR, seeking to solve 2 problems: to prevent the aggressors from dragging the Soviet Union into a war in conditions of international isolation, and to have time to re-equip the Red Army with modern weapons. At the December-January meeting mentioned above, a strategic plan for the defense of the state border of 1941 was developed, hereinafter referred to as the Defense Plan. Initially, the plan assumed 2 options for response. In the first, the main blow was expected in the center, north of Polzai, on Minsk, Smolensk, Moscow. In the second, south of Polisia, to Lviv, Kiev. At the insistence of I.V. Stalin, the second option was approved: unfinished reinforced concrete bunker on the new, 1939, border of the USSR. By 1941, the line of fortifications, the so-called Stalin Line, along the old border had already been disarmed, and the new one was not yet ready. Stalin believed that Hitler would not be able to wage a long war without seizing the industrial resources of Ukraine. In general, this forecast was correct, but the Germans in the final version of the Barbarossa plan moved their main attack from the south to the center. And the Soviet intelligence failed to catch this moment. The Soviet defense plan proceeded from the experience of the First World War and provided for rather long periods, up to 15 or more days, of mobilization and concentration of the main forces after the declaration of war. The experience of the already unfolding World War II was not taken into account, although the aggressive actions of Germany clearly proved that the war could now begin without a declaration, with a sudden and massive strike of the main enemy forces mobilized in advance and already deployed in groupings. The underestimation of this innovation predetermined our fatal delay in the operational deployment of the first-line troops in June 1941. The defense plan provided for the protection of the border by covering armies with the task of repelling the forward units of the invasion. Then, after the mobilization of the main forces, it was supposed to defeat him on his own territory, as it was quite correctly interpreted by the Soviet military doctrine. But, as you know, immediately before the start of the war, a categorical demand hung over Soviet commanders of all ranks, binding their initiative: do not succumb to provocations, do not provoke a war, up to the ban on opening fire on the invading enemy. This absurd prescription is explained by the complex international situation in which the Soviet Union found itself at that time. The attitude of England and the USA towards the USSR in 1939 to 1941 was by no means allied, but rather even hostile. In 1940, during the Soviet-Finnish War, the British supplied weapons to the Finns and planned to bomb Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus. We also recall the statement of the American President Roosevelt, who was going to help either Germany or the USSR, depending on whether who will attack whom, and will overcome. The decisive military preparations of the Soviet side could be presented by Hitler as an aggression against Germany, and the international public opinion of that time could easily swallow this bait, leaving the USSR in complete isolation in the face of the aggressive intentions of Germany and its allies. However, Stalin's excessive political caution did not help either. In accordance with the second option, the Kiev Special Military District, Kovo, from June 22 the Southwestern Front, Commander Colonel General M.P. Kirponos, member of the Military Council Corps Commissar N.N. Vatutin, Chief of Staff Lieutenant General M.A. Perkave, received the most funds. The border from Vlodava to Lipkaya, 940 kilometers, was covered by four armies: the 5th General M. Potapov and the 22nd Mechanized Corps from Vlodava to Kristinopol, 170 kilometers, 6th General I. Musichenko and 4th Mechanized Corps to Radimno, 170 kilometers, 26th General F. Kostenko and 8th Mechanized Corps to Tvorilnya, 130 kilometers. The 12th General P. Ponedolin and the 16th Mechanized Corps covered a strip of 500 kilometers from Chernivtsi to the mouth of the Dniester. The 9th, 15th and 19th Mechanized Corps and 5 anti-tank artillery brigades were in the reserve in the formation stage. The defense relied on 6 fortified areas, but their construction and armament were not completed by June 22. The deployment of the armies corresponded to the plan of the headquarters to launch a retaliatory counterattack. The strongest Mechanized Corps, the 4th and 8th, were moved into the 6th Army's zone. The main forces were concentrated in the Lvov ledge, just like the Zapvio in Bialystok. From here the command of the SWF, assuming the main blow of the Germans from Lublin to Lvov, intended, having beaten off the enemy, to launch a counterattack on the flank of the enemy's Lublin grouping. At the same time, according to the plan of the headquarters, the Western Front should simultaneously strike from Bialystok on its northern flank. The overhanging ledges gave the Soviet troops such an opportunity, but the Germans, in case of a surprise attack, also had a chance to cut them and slam our troops into bags, as it later happened near Bialystok on the Western Front. The deployment of the armies corresponded to the plan of the headquarters to launch a retaliatory counterattack. The strongest Mechanized Corps, the 4th and 8th, were moved into the 6th Army's zone. The main forces were concentrated in the Lvov ledge, just like the Zapvio in Bialystok. From here the command of the SWF, assuming the main blow of the Germans from Lublin to Lvov, intended, having beaten off the enemy, to launch a counterattack on the flank of the enemy's Lublin grouping. At the same time, according to the plan of the headquarters, the Western Front should simultaneously strike from Bialystok on its northern flank. The overhanging ledges gave the Soviet troops such an opportunity, but the Germans, in case of a surprise attack, also had a chance to cut them and slam our troops into bags, as it later happened near Bialystok on the Western Front. The deployment of the armies corresponded to the plan of the headquarters to launch a retaliatory counterattack. The strongest mechanized corps, the 4th and 8th, were moved into the 6th Army's zone. The main forces were concentrated in the Lvov ledge, just like the Zapvio in Bialystok. From here the command of the SWF, assuming the main blow of the Germans from Lublin to Lvov, intended, having beaten off the enemy, to launch a counterattack on the flank of the enemy's Lublin grouping. At the same time, according to the plan of the headquarters, the Western Front should simultaneously strike from Bialystok on its northern flank. The overhanging ledges gave the Soviet troops such an opportunity, but the Germans, in case of a surprise attack, also had a chance to cut them and slam our troops into bags, as it later happened near Bialystok on the Western Front. The main forces were concentrated in the Lvov ledge, just like the Zapvio in Bialystok. From here the command of the SWF, assuming the main blow of the Germans from Lublin to Lvov, intended, having beaten off the enemy, to launch a counterattack on the flank of the enemy's Lublin grouping. At the same time, according to the plan of the headquarters, the Western Front should simultaneously strike from Bialystok on its northern flank. The overhanging ledges gave the Soviet troops such an opportunity, but the Germans, in case of a surprise attack, also had a chance to cut them and slam our troops into bags, as it later happened near Bialystok on the Western Front. The main forces were concentrated in the Lvov ledge, just like the Zapvio in Bialystok. From here the command of the SWF, assuming the main blow of the Germans from Lublin to Lvov, intended, having beaten off the enemy, to launch a counterattack on the flank of the enemy's Lublin grouping. At the same time, according to the plan of the headquarters, the Western Front should simultaneously strike from Bialystok on its northern flank. The overhanging ledges gave the Soviet troops such an opportunity, but the Germans, in case of a surprise attack, also had a chance to cut them and slam our troops into bags, as it later happened near Bialystok on the Western Front. At the same time, according to the plan of the headquarters, the Western Front should simultaneously strike from Bialystok on its northern flank. The overhanging ledges gave the Soviet troops such an opportunity, but the Germans, in case of a surprise attack, also had a chance to cut them and slam our troops into bags, as it later happened near Bialystok on the Western Front. At the same time, according to the plan of the headquarters, the Western Front should simultaneously strike from Bialystok on its northern flank. The overhanging ledges gave the Soviet troops such an opportunity, but the Germans, in case of a surprise attack, also had a chance to cut them and slam our troops into bags, as it later happened near Bialystok on the Western Front. Commander of Kovo, Colonel General MP Kirponos during the May Day parade in Kiev in 1941. The deployment of the Kovo Mechanized Corps was poorly combined with the plan. They were located 200 to 400 kilometers from the border and at a distance of 100 to 150 kilometers from each other, and their divisions were 50 to 100 kilometers along the front and in depth. Therefore, it was very difficult to collect them in a short time in a grouping. According to the operational directive of the General Staff, brought to the district belatedly in May, Rifle Corps should be deployed in the first echelon, Mechanized Corps in the second, with rears 20 to 30 kilometers from the border, where 4 Mechanized Corps were to be moved, one for each of the 4 armies. The total depth of defense did not exceed 50 kilometers. The command post of the front was determined in Ternopil. But all these movements were allowed to be made only by special order of the People's Commissar. Attempts by the command of the Kovo, which saw the concentration of the Germans, to advance some formations in advance to the border, to the line of the Urs, were immediately suppressed by Moscow for fear of provoking a conflict. Only on June 15, when the Germans had already begun to occupy their starting positions, MP Kirponos received an order to start advancing 5 Rifle Corps from June 17, but to do this covertly, in 10 to 12 night transitions. On June 22, at 2:30 a.m., the headquarters of the Kovo received a warning telegram about a possible attack, that is, an hour and a half before it. We did not have time to transfer it to all connections. And the staff column itself on the way to Ternopil came under bombardment. The time for the preparation and operational formation of the Soviet troops was hopelessly lost. With a sudden blow, the enemy did not leave even an hour to deploy and occupy the lines. Let us note once again, strategically, the war was not unexpected. They were waiting for it, they were preparing for it. Unexpected, as G.K. Zhukov later wrote, was a massive blow from the fully mobilized German armies in all directions. This is the essence of surprise. Occupy our troops in a timely manner the lines of defense, the outcome of the border battle could be different. On June 22, 1941, at 0400, the Germans simultaneously launched artillery fire and an air strike, to a depth of 400 kilometers, on barracks and airfields, especially on the towns of Mechanized Core and those airfields where new types of aircraft were located. Purpose: to deprive the Russians, first of all, of mobile forces and an air shield. On the first day, about 180 Soviet aircraft were destroyed on the ground almost with impunity. There was no retaliatory strike, including because all the commanders were warned not to succumb to provocations, do not carry out any other measures without special orders. A mechanized column of German troops is rapidly advancing deep into Soviet territory. June 1941. The commanders of the formations, receiving orders, wondered, is this a provocation or a war? Having opened the secret, red packets of Kovo 41, the district cover plan, they followed the routes indicated by them, entered into oncoming battles, and were arbitrarily drawn into the maelstrom of events. At 10 o'clock on June 22, Directive No. 2 arrived from Moscow, ordering to destroy the enemy in areas where he violated the border, and again a warning, from now on, until further notice, ground troops do not cross the border. In the first hours of the outbreak of the war, the headquarters of the Southwestern Front lost contact with the armies, did not know the situation, just as the headquarters did not know it. Only by the night of June 23 and later did it become clear approximately where and with what forces the Germans were conducting the main offensive. According to Option 2, the General Staff expected the main blow in the south. The headquarters of the SWF was waiting for it through Ravrovskaya to Lvov, and Rundstedt struck from the Ustilut and Sokol regions to Dubno, Lutsk, and immediately deployed 37 divisions. Only against our Fifth Army, Rundstedt threw 10 infantry and 4 tank divisions of the Wehrmacht, and in readiness for the development of success he kept 1 tank, 2 infantry and 4 motorized divisions. More than 20 Ryukyna and Kleist divisions against 5 Soviet ones near the border. Our entire grouping in the main strike area did not have time to quickly prepare and consisted of about 100,000 people and 2,000 guns and mortars, and 300,000 men and 5,500 guns and mortars were aimed at them, a triple superiority in manpower and more than double superiority in artillery. In addition, the Germans seized complete air supremacy. At 11 p.m. on June 22, a new Directive No. 3 was received, in which the front was assigned an obviously impossible task for June 23 to 24, with concentric strikes in the general direction of Lublin by the forces of the 5th and 6th Armies, at least 5 surround and destroy the enemy grouping advancing on the Vladimir-Volinsky, Kristinopol front with aviation of the front, by the end of 24.6, capture the Lublin region. Neither the People's Commissar, nor the General Staff knew that by the end of the day, the 48th had already poured from Sokol to Radekov and sought to break through to Lutsk. 3rd German Motorized Corps, a column of German armored vehicles on the road in western Ukraine. The letter K on the vehicles is the designation of the 1st Panzer Group von Kleist. June 1941. At the Military Council of the Southwestern Front, 2 irreconcilable opinions clashed, to immediately attack or defend. Chief of Staff Perkave soberly assessed the situation with inherent logic. The enemy deployed a strong first echelon, the second will be stronger. Our troops of the first echelon did not have time to either get into position or turn around. The corps of our second echelon will be able to advance only after a few days, in 2 to 3 days of the 9th and 19th Mechanized Corps, and in 5 to 6 days, rifle. Only the 4th, 8th and 15th Mechanized Corps will be able to advance in 1 or 2 days. And all this is under continuous bombardment and unorganized rear areas. It is difficult to organize a grouping and a simultaneous strike in a short time. The Corps will engage separately in unfavorable head-on battles. Conclusion: to ask Moscow to change the now obviously impossible offensive task to defense along the line of the Urs on the old border. The uncompromising and energetic Vatutin advocated an immediate offensive, reproached Perkave for underestimating the political moment and causing moral damage to troops brought up in an offensive spirit. The commander of the Southwestern Front, MP Kirponos, concluded the dispute that had arisen, noting both the correctness of Perkave and the political significance of Vatutin's considerations. Kirponos stressed that the order must be strictly followed, and although it is hardly possible to take Lublin by the end of June 24, it is necessary to strike a powerful blow. The main thing is to quickly concentrate the Mechanized Corps for their simultaneous strike. Tasks were set. Commander 5 Potapov and the 22nd Mechanized Corps prevent the Germans from breaking through to Lutsk, and Commander 6 Musichenko organize a strike from the south under the base of the German wedge with the 4th and 8th Mechanized Corps. German tanks from the 11th TD pass by a burning Soviet BT-7. June 22, 1941, near the village of Sudan. Direct a strike from the frontline 15th Mechanized Corps there. The 9th and 19th accelerate the advance to the battlefield. The head of the operational department, I.K.H. Bagramian, who was present at the military council, noted, Vatutin cheerfully supported the commander. Percave only silently nodded. I.K.H. Bagramian gives the following explanation for the decision. Apparently, Kirponos believed that in a difficult, increasingly threatening situation, the main thing is not to doom the troops to passive defense, but to maintain unity of views and actions in order to help the High Command implement the plan, because the position of not only ours, but also other fronts depended on this. The Chief of the General Staff G.K. Zhukov, who arrived at the front headquarters on the evening of June 23, approved the decision of Kirponos and demanded that the creation of a strong strike group be accelerated. In such tense circumstances, the first decision was made for a tank battle. The German light tanks PZ.IIF were superior to our BT and T-26 in terms of armor, but were inferior to them in terms of armament. Mechanized Corps Kovo, Southwestern Front. Mechanized Corps first appeared in the Red Army at the initiative of Marshal M.N. Tukhachevsky and his supporters, who had to overcome the resistance of those who doubted the effectiveness of motorization and relied, as the Marshal wrote, not on the study and accounting of new weapons in the hands of a possible enemy, but on only the lessons of the Civil War. Military science in the USSR did not lag behind other countries in developing new principles of military art and in improving the structure of the armed forces. In particular, the theory of deep combat and operations was developed using mobile mechanized troops to break through and operate in the enemy's operational zone. In 1932, 2 mechanized corps were formed, 2 more years later. German strategists openly admitted. But in 1939, for various and not always thought-out reasons, the mechanized corps were disbanded, although not for long. The experience of the outbreak of World War II, and especially the German success in Poland and in the West, clearly showed the need for new forms. D.G. Pavlov, who was among the opponents of large tank formations, frankly stated at the December-January meeting of 1940-41, the views regarding the use of tanks turned out to be the most correct and were confirmed in the actions of German tank formations. The Germans did not invent anything, they took what we had. Military leaders came to the military leadership, who understood the new trends in the development of military affairs and laid the foundation for the principle, as Marshal S.K. Tymoshenko formulated it, teach troops only what is needed in the war, and only as it is done in the war. For the tank troops, the next stage of reorganization began, but now it was already necessary to catch up with the outstripping enemy, and it was not possible to complete the reorganization by the beginning of the war. The loss of precious pre-war time had a tragic effect at the beginning of the war. Decree of the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR No. 1193, 464 SS of June 6, 1940, p. 5, prescribed, to have 8 mechanized corps and 2 separate tank divisions in the Red Army, a total of 8 directorates of mechanized corps with a motorcycle regiment and corps units, 18 tank divisions and 8 motorized divisions. They began to form not 8, but 9 buildings. In March 1941, at the suggestion of I.V. Stalin, they approved a plan to create another 21 corps. Each of them, consisting of 2 armored and 1 motorized divisions in wartime states, had enormous strike power. The mechanized corps was supposed to have 36,000 people, 1031 tanks, 120 heavy, 420 medium, 333 light, 152 chemical, 358 guns and mortars, 268 armored vehicles, 1 air squadron, communications battalions and an engineer. He was given an air brigade consisting of bomber and fighter regiments. The staff of the motorized division included 2 motorized regiments, 1 regiment of light tanks from 4 battalions, 250 BT tanks and 17 T-37 tanks, 51 armored vehicles, an artillery battery of 4 76mm guns, and, in addition, 12 152mm and 16 122mm howitzers, 16 76mm cannons, 30 45mm guns, 82 50 and 82mm mortars, 8 37mm anti-aircraft guns, 12 DShK machine guns and 447 heavy and light machine guns, 15 87 cars, 159 motorcycles and 128 tractors. The scheme of organization of the Soviet Tank Division of the Mechanized Corps in 1940, 11,343 people. 413 tanks, of which 105 kV, 200 T, 34, 26 BT, 7, 18 T, 26, 54 chemical. Armored vehicles, 91. Guns and mortars, 58. Such an organization was supposed to allow the Mechanized Corps to independently conduct all types of combat and interact with infantry and artillery. The basis was made up of tank divisions, superior to the German ones in many respects. In our TD, 2 tank regiments were planned, 375 tanks, including 63 heavy, 210 medium, 41 light, 54 flamethrower. In the German one tank regiment, 135 tanks. In our TD, 273 heavy and medium tanks, and in the German, 88 medium. The Germans did not have heavy tanks until the beginning of 1943. In the German motorized division, 2 regiments without tanks. In ours, there was a 3rd tank regiment, 275 light. But all these advantages were in 1941 only in theory, according to the state, or in the project for 1942-43. But in reality, by June 22, 1941, out of 8 mechanized corps in Kovo, there was not a single fully equipped one, and tanks of new models, KV and T-34, were sprayed across 5 corps. The bulk of the tanks were T-26 and BT. Of the 16 tank divisions, 4 were equipped with KV and T-34 tanks, the 8th and 32nd TDS of the 4th MK, by 88 and 71%, the 21st TD of the 8th MK, by 60%, and the 10th TD 15th MK, by 57%. In general, the tank fleet of Kovo is about 5,500 tanks, including 38 36, T-26 and BT, which were already obsolete vehicles and were not very suitable for modern warfare. A significant part of the BT and T-26 were old modifications discontinued, BT-2, BT-5 and twin-turret T-26, or had exhausted motor resources and should be considered rather combat training vehicles. Soviet tankers washed the T-26 after the exercises. In the background, obsolete modifications of the twin-turreted T-26 are visible. By 1941 they had already been clearly transferred to the category of training ones. Large numbers given in tables 1 and 2 require clarification. Archival sources are contradictory. Various data are given in the literature, especially on the availability of new models, KV and T-34, and their combat readiness. The numbers vary by hundreds of tanks by hull and thousands by total. In the extract, only tanks of the first and second categories are classified as combat ready, that is, not in operation and fit, but requiring current military repairs. But the Kovo Mechanized Corps, with a 29% supply of technical flyers, A and B, could not carry out timely repairs of such a number, 3,664, of tanks, even small ones. Therefore, the suitability of vehicles of the second category for combat is also conditional. In the very first days of the war, hundreds of them remained on the roads, not reaching combat positions. Consequently, it was possible to reliably enter into battle only tanks, first cat. 1124 units. And only partially second. By 1941, BT tanks formed the basis of armament of the armored forces of the Red Army, in the photo BT-5. In all buildings there was a large shortage of transport. According to the MOP plan, deliveries were planned from the national economy with the outbreak of war. Not a single vehicle arrived for the first battles, and the motorized divisions turned out to be on foot. The district lacked cars, 8750, motorcycles, 4800. In the tank divisions of the 9th, 19th and 22nd MK, with a standard norm of 1360 vehicles, the staffing averaged 27%, and in motorized divisions, 24%. With a norm of 380 motorcycles in the TD, there were no more than 5% of them, and in motor divisions with a norm of 159, about 3%. Not the best situation turned out to be with the means of traction. 2,500 tractors and tractors, 3,600 trailers were missing. There were no means of evacuating tanks from the battlefield. Cash tractors CHTZ and STZ had an infantry speed of 6 km/h. With a norm of 84 tractors and tractors in each TD, the staffing did not exceed 25 to 30%. Motorized infantry, artillery, supply of ammunition. Table 1. The combat and strength of the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front on June 22, 1941. Asterisk by June 22, 1941, the 16th and 24th MKs were in the initial stage of formation. They did not take part in the tank counterattack. 4th MK, 8th and 32nd TD, 81st MD, commander of the G.M. A. Vlasov, Dissel. Lvov, as part of the 6th Army, 8th MK, 12th and 34th TD, 7th MD, G.L. D. Ryabyshev, Drogobich, 26th Army, 9th MK, 20th and 35th TD, 131st MD, G.M. K. Rokossovsky, Novograd-Volynski, District Front, 15th MK, 10th and 37th TD, 212th MD, G.M. I. Carpezo, Brody, District Front, 19th MK, 40th and 43rd TD, 213th MD, G.M. N. V. Feklenko, Berdichev, District Front, 22nd MK, 19th and 41st TD, 215th MD, G.M. S. M. Kondrusev, Rovno, 5th Army, 16th MK, 15th and 39th TD, 240th MD, G.M. A. D. Sokolov, Kamenets-Podilsk, 12th Army, 24th MK, 45th and 49th TD, 216th MD, G.M. G. M. Chistyrkov, Proskurov, District Front, Table 2. Extract on Kovo from the Summary Statement of the Quantitative and Qualitative Composition of the Tank Fleet of the Red Army on June 1, 1941. Air cover was assigned to frontline aviation, while the Corps themselves had only batteries of 4 37mm guns and 20 to 24 anti-aircraft machine guns each. The massive use of tanks in campaigns in the West made it necessary to strengthen anti-tank defenses. The directive of the General Staff of May 16, 1941, TSAMO USSR, F-38, Op 30425, D-52L, 4-7, prescribed, arm the Mechanized Corps before they receive tanks with 76 and 45mm cannons, DT machine guns in order to use them as anti-tank regiments and divisions. The calculation was also given, each regiment should have 45mm guns, 18, 76mm, 24, machine guns, 80. But this was supposed to be done only in July. In order to jointly operate with the Mechanized Corps and cover them, the NPO decided in April 1942 to create Mobile Artillery and Anti-Tank Brigades, APTBR, consisting of 2 artillery regiments, 120 guns, anti-aircraft machine guns, 28 pieces, a mine sapper battalion, 4,800 anti-tank and 1,000 anti-personnel mines, and an auto battalion. They planned to create 10, but by July only 3 had time. The 1st Anti-Tank Brigade of Major General K. Moskalenko was in Kovo and had 76mm guns, 48, 85mm guns, 72, 37mm guns, 16, DSHK machine guns, 72 PCs. The incompleteness of the formation of Mechanized Corps immediately before the war is due to 2 objective reasons: the extremely short time for rearmament and the limited capabilities of industry. For their full complement, and there were 29 of them, 16,600 tanks of only new types were required, and only 32,000, which the Soviet industry, even at the limit of its capabilities, could not accomplish, as well as supply special equipment. The reorganization immediately caused difficulties with personnel, and with the combat training of privates and operational training of commanders, headquarters and services. Mechanized Corps were created mainly on the basis of cavalry divisions. The composition switched to a completely new type of troops. Studying at tankerdromes did not stop even at night, but by June 22 they managed to master only training in the company battalion link in the offensive spirit. Defense was not provided for in the programs. Due to the frequent relocation and consumption of motor resources, they did not have time to work out hammering together interaction with infantry, artillery, and aviation. Many management issues have not been resolved. Czechs noted the inability to repel massive tank attacks. The Hitlerite leadership caught the initial stage of the reorganization of the Soviet tank forces and took this factor into account in their plans. Hitler was in a hurry with the attack, planning it back in 1940. He was worried about the growing power of the USSR, because already in 1942, and even closer to the end of 1941, the armor shield of the Red Army could be insurmountable for the Wehrmacht. Against the Kovo Mechanized Corps, Army Group South fielded the 1st Panzer Group von Kleist, consisting of 3 tank corps consisting of 5 tank and 4 motorized divisions, 16th, 25th, SS Viking and SS Life Standard Adolf Hitler. Let the reader not be confused by the large differences in the numbers of Soviet and German tanks. The formal ratio is 9:1. Mobile German formations in a number of military technical and operational tactical indicators had a significant qualitative superiority over the Soviet mechanized corps of the Kovo. The enemy had basically the same type of tanks, well-trained and combat-experienced crews, strong air cover, well-developed interaction with infantry, artillery, and aviation. By the beginning of the attack on the Soviet Union, Germany not only had already transferred its industry to a military footing, but also in many respects surpassed the USSR in terms of military technical level. Red Army officers undergo retraining at the Academy of Armored Forces, VAMM. Moscow, 1940. German tanks, although inferior to ours in terms of armament and armor, nevertheless, were more in line with the tactics of a deep operation and tank breakthroughs. German tanks had better visibility and controllability, were better adapted to long marches, equipped with transceiver radio stations, which ensured constant communication and flexible control in battle. On the contrary, the undercarriage of our tanks could not withstand long transitions, visibility bordered on blindness, radio stations were available only on command vehicles, and even then not on all of them. These shortcomings affected not only the old BT and T-26 vehicles, but also the latest KV and T-34. Torn between firing their guns and observing the situation, the Soviet tank commanders struggled to control the battle. They had to give commands with flags, as well as for better visibility, to rise from the towers, exposing themselves to bullets and fragments. The People's Commissar of Defense of the USSR, Marshal S. K. Timoshenko, in a letter addressed to Voroshilov dated the 11th of June 1940, noted, "The experimental exercises of the tank and mechanized troops conducted showed that the issues of managing tank units are extremely difficult. And yet, despite all the shortcomings, miscalculations, incompleteness of the reorganization and delay, the Kovo Mechanized Corps represented a serious shock fist." According to the main tactical and technical data, Soviet tanks were not inferior and even surpassed the German ones. Our heavy KV was completely impregnable for the German anti-tank weapons of 1941, the medium T-34 was almost invulnerable, and the basis of the Soviet tank fleet, the light T-26 and BT. With skillful tactics, they could quite effectively deal with their 45mm guns even with medium German PZ-3 and PZ-4. But, as you know, the outcome of a tank battle does not always depend on the results of a tank duel. Table 3. The composition and armament of the 1st Tank Group von Kleist on June 22, 1941. The 1st TGR was supported by 3 divisions of Stug .3 assault guns, 18 self-propelled guns each, 54 in total. In the reserve were formations for the development of success, prepared units to make up for losses, decisions of the command of the Southwestern Front and the general course of the tank battle. By the evening of June 23, the front headquarters finally managed to get information about the situation on the right flank and in the center, at the junction of the 5th and 6th Armies, Diagram 2. In the area of Lublin, the 45th and 82nd Divisions held back the enemy, which did not have time to reach their original positions. In the areas of Vladimir Volinsky and Milyatin, the 87th and 124th Divisions fought surrounded, also not having time to take the prepared lines. The main blow of Rundstedt and the miscalculation of the Kovo 41 plan were looming, in which the Lublin-Lvov direction was overestimated and the Lublin-Lutsk direction was underestimated. The second ran along the edge of the Pripyat swamps and was assessed as unpromising for the enemy, but it was from here that Kleist with 2 tank columns wedged into the junction of our armies at Radekhov and Vladimir Volinsky, aiming at Dubno, Brody, Lutsk, where the 15th and 22nd Mechanized Corps fought with them, as well as the 1st Moskalenko anti-tank brigade. The front command did not have a unity of views on the issue of an immediate tank counterattack. On June 22, in the evening, while developing the plan, Vashigin and Perkave again clashed in disputes. The first ardently advocated an immediate strike. The proposals of the second prudently boiled down to the following. Since the 4th, 15th and 22nd Mechanized Corps are already engaged in heavy fighting and have suffered losses, and the 8th, 9th and 19th are on marches under continuous bombing, then collect them all in groups at the lines of attacks in 2 to 3 days will fail. To throw into battle separately means to expose them to enemy blows and bleed them. Tomorrow, June 24th, only the 15th and 22nd will be able to attack, and even then not with all their forces. This is too little for a counterattack. Commander of the 1st TGR, Colonel General von Kleist. Therefore, the conclusion is, to give the order to the encircled divisions to break through on their own, and to concentrate the Mechanized Corps, together with the riflemen, within 2 to 3 days on the line of the ears of the old border in 2 groups and then powerfully hit the German wedges. The arguments of the commander MP Kirpenos were different. The retreat of tank forces and passive waiting can result in grave consequences for the border formations, which hold back the pressure of the enemy many times superior. How long can they withstand it? The 15th and 22nd Mechanized Corps have already entered the battle on the enemy's wedges. This is our first tier. With the approach of the 4th, 8th, and then the 9th and 19th, we will have the 2nd. Therefore, now the combat mission for June 24th is, Commander, 5 Potapov, using the forces of the 22nd Mechanized Corps and the 135th Division, strike at Vladimir Volinsky, defeat the enemy units that have broken through in the Lutsk direction and connect with the encircled 87th Division, the commander of the 15th Mechanized Corps, Carpezo, part of the forces to defend at Radekov and Brody, and the main ones to strike at Berestechko, destroy the enemy's tank and motor units and connect with the encircled 124th Division, Commander, 6 Musichenko to withdraw the 4th Mechanized Corps from the battle and turn it in support of the 15th in the attack on Berestechko. The coordination of the actions of the 22nd, 9th and 19th Mechanized Corps is entrusted to General Potapov, the 4th, 8th and 15th, to the front headquarters. The commander heavily concluded the meeting. There is no other way out. We cannot retreat in anticipation of the concentration of all the corps. Percave was sullenly silent. The arguments of Kirpenos sounded convincing. Vatutin supported the commander without hesitation. The operation had to start simultaneously with the creation of an offensive grouping at a time when the rifle and mechanized corps of the second echelon of the front were still 200 to 400 kilometers from the front line, and the enemy, having broken through the border cover, managed to break through a gap of 40 to 50 kilometers and threatened to cover the main forces of the front and a breakthrough to Kiev on the move. Based on the prevailing conditions, Kirpenos decided to delay the advance of Kleist's tank columns by stubborn defense and tank counterattacks and then surround them and destroy them with the forces of the Second Echelon Corps. A pre-war photograph captured Soviet T-26 crews in formation in front of their combat vehicles. Thus, the planned tank counterattack was inevitably divided into 2 stages. At the first, the 4th and 22nd were involved. At the second, the 8th, 9th and 19th Mechanized Corps. The 9th advanced to Lutsk, the 19th to Rovno, the 8th from the south to Brody. The strike of the Mechanized Corps was to be carried out together with the Rifle Corps, the 37th from the 6th Army, and the 31st and 36th from the reserve. They were promoted to the districts of Kremenets, Lutsk, Dubno. The multitemporal approach to the starting positions predetermined their introduction into battle separately, doomed them to blows in oncoming battles, but the increasingly dangerous situation forced such a decision. In these tense days, the main thing was to contain the strike groups of Rundstedt, primarily tank and motorized divisions, to seize the initiative, to prevent the Germans from breaking out into operational space with access to the Dnieper. At the first stage of the tank battle on June 25 to 26, oncoming battles unfolded with increasing fierceness, especially fierce at the junction of the flanks of the 5th and 6th Armies, the Ustilag, Sokol sector, where Rundstedt moved the 1st Kleist tank group and the 6th Field Division Ryakinar's army. German intelligence knew that here the entire Russian grouping consisted of only 3 divisions and 2 mechanized corps, the 15th and 22nd, and that some sectors were not covered by troops. The commanders of the 5th and 6th Armies, Potapov and Musichenko, in the first hours of June 22 acted like the front command, according to the cover plan, and sought to defeat the Kleist motor columns with blows from the Army Mechanized Corps. The 4th Mechanized Corps, alerted on the night of June 22, was bombed not in the towns, but on the march to the border in Yanov and Krakovets. It had up to 400 T-34 and KV tanks. In the strongest 32nd TD, Colonel E. G. Pushkin, there were 325 tanks, of which 49 were KV, 173 were T-34, the remaining 162 were light VT and T-26 and T-27 tankettes. In the first battle, our 32nd TD pushed back the 125th German Infantry Division, which tried to break through to Lvov through Janov and Krakovets on the move. According to A.V. Yegorov, regiment commander of the 32nd TD, the Germans in these battles lost 30 tanks, out of 40, 25 armored vehicles, 9 heavy guns, dozens of motorcycles and cars, and up to the regiment killed. Here, maybe for the first time, the Germans felt the superiority of the T-34 and KV. German guns were powerless against Soviet tanks. The corps commander of the 15th Mechanized Corps Carpezo managed to forcibly advance an advance detachment to Radekhof, destroyed the landing force and stopped the German avant-garde. Radekhof passed from hand to hand. Ultimately, the detachment, hiding behind artillery fire, KV and T-34 attacks, knocking out tanks and motorized infantry of the enemy, held Radekhof for several hours until the main forces of the corps approached. Scheme 2. Fighting on the Southwestern Front from June 22 to June 24, 1941. Commander of the 22nd Kondrusev, not yet knowing that the enemy aimed the main blow at the 5th Army Zone, was able to raise the 19th Tank and 215th Motorized, but actually foot, divisions. 41st TD lost contact, its location in these clock was unknown. Together with the corps, the 1st APTBR Moskalenko operated. The German 14th TD with motorized infantry came across it. The oncoming battle was distinguished by fire tenacity. Dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, dozens of guns and hundreds of German corpses remained on the Vladimir-Volynsk-Lutsk highway. The commanders of the German advanced units, who did not expect such a rebuff, reported on the stubbornness of the Russians, the counterattacks of Soviet tanks, asked for reinforcements, but received orders in response to accelerate the pace of advance. Rundstedt's headquarters, like Halder, hoped for tetanus and paralysis of the Soviet command, but the first confusion quickly passed. On the Soviet side, the Battle of June 23 to 25 unfolded under the influence of conflicting orders and decisions. Some commanders had a landing fear, which reached the point that when the Germans, the Brandenburg Regiment, threw small parachute groups and motorcycle submachine gunners into our rear for noise and imitation of the environment, then instead of rifle units they threw tank units to eliminate them, and aviation, TSAMO, F-229, Op 3780, D-6, L-119. The attack on Radekivsokol was weakened by the decision of Commander 6 Musichenko, who allocated only 3 battalions for him, at the same time ordering the 4th MK to strike in the Dunkovets area, the left flank of the army, where there was no serious threat. Thus, the Mechanized Corps was far from the direction of the main German strike. G.K. Zhukov, who was at the headquarters of the Southwestern Front until June 26, demanded the creation of a strong grouping in the Brody area, 4th, 15th and 8th MK, which, together with the Rovno, 22nd, 9th and 19th MK, was supposed to defeat the 1st TGR Kleist. But it turned out to be difficult to withdraw the 4th and 15th MK from the battles. Then Zhukov decided to reduce the zone of action on the 15th and reinforce it with the 8th Panzer Division from the 4th MK, which was done belatedly. By June 25, the 8th TD did not have time to reach the designated area. A German tanker looking out through the side hatch of a PZ.3 tank turret. Kleist strengthened his tank motorized group at Radekhof, increasing superiority and pressure on the 15th Mechanized Corps. 2 German tank divisions pressed on the corps, and the approach of our 4th and 8th Mechanized Corps was delayed. And yet, the 15th stopped and held back the German offensive. Moreover, on June 24, Carpezo, with a bold counterattack, knocked the enemy out of position and moved forward. But this success, like the success of other attacks, was exhausted by the frontal pushing back of the Germans and inflicting considerable losses on them, but did not lead to the defeat of the enemy. This could only be achieved by a strong joint strike of 3 or all mechanized corps of the Southwestern Front. The Germans, constantly evading the frontal attacks of the 15th MK, retreated and, having found weaknesses in its front, threw tank units there, threatening to intercept communications. On June 24, Halder wrote in his diary. On June 25, decisive events began to develop in the Zitomykiv direction, where the main enemy grouping was advancing. Here, the Kleist tanks and the Ryukyna infantry, using a 50 km gap at the junction of the 5th and 6th armies, tried to rush in a straight line to Kiev, so that later turning towards the 17th Stolpnagel army to cut off the troops of the center and the entire left wing of the SWF from the 5th TH army. The military council of the front made efforts to defeat the German grouping, but a strong blow against it on June 25 failed. By order of Musichenko, on June 25, the 4th Mechanized Corps was to advance in the Yavorov area, away from the main German attack. The 15th Mechanized Corps, attacking on a wide front and not having sufficient transport, could not group with all its forces at its original positions. And the 8th Mechanized Corps continued force marches and only by the evening of the 25th approached Brody, having made a run of 500 kilometers and having greatly exhausted its motor resources. More than 40% of his combat vehicles and a significant part of the artillery remained on the roads. The Corps was changed task several times by orders of the 26th, then the 6th Armies, then the headquarters of the front, and each of them cancelled the previous one. The 22nd Mechanized Corps and the 1st APTBR in heavy fighting held back the pressure of the 13th and 14th Panzer Divisions of Kleist, knocked out their tanks, but they themselves suffered heavy losses. Based on the situation, G.K. Zhukov and M.P. Kirponos postponed the coordinated strike of the Corps to June 26. By June 25, the advanced units of the 9th and 19th Mechanized Corps had reached the Rovno area, and on June 26 to 30, decisive events unfolded in the Zhytomyr direction, the second stage of the tank battle, Scheme 3. The 9th Mechanized Corps of K. Rokossovsky from the march, without waiting for the approach of all regiments, hit the Kleist wedge in a southwestern direction and threw back parts of the 3rd German Motorized Corps from Kleven. Our 20th TD broke through to Dubno and was 10 kilometers from the city, and the 131st Motorized Division entered the Lutsk region and covered the crossings over the river. STYR. At the same time, the 19th Mechanized Corps of N. Faklenko, covering the crossings over the river with its motorized units. STYR, hit the German wedge in a southerly direction, crushed the tanks and motorized infantry of the enemy and broke through 25 kilometers south of Rovno. The blows turned out to be so unexpected for the German command that, as Rundstedt's reports to Berlin, records of motorized corps journals and Halder's diary testify, panic and tank fear arose in the Kleist and Ryakinar divisions, rumors spread about the breakthrough of Russian tanks at Ostrog and Berestechko, and the advancing columns retreated in disorder on Stojanov, mixed up in traffic jams on all roads. The German 3rd Motorized Corps, having received a strong blow, was on the verge of defeat, but the command of the southwestern front did not fully use this tactical breakthrough. The 9th and 19th Corps advanced in divergent directions, their efforts were not united. Communication and interaction between them was not organized. The Corps at Radekhof and Brody, the 8th and 15th, could not advance that day, delaying the strike for a whole day due to their unpreparedness. Only in the morning all the Mechanized Corps from the south and north launched a general offensive against both German wedges and in the Pentagon Lutsk, Rovno, Ostrog, Brody, Dubno more than 2,000 tanks rumbled from both sides, Scheme 3. Halder wrote in his diary on June 26, Army Group South is slowly moving forward, unfortunately suffering significant losses, the enemy has a firm and energetic leadership. The enemy is constantly bringing up new fresh forces from the depths against our tank wedge, Decree. SOC, V. 3, Book 1. Attack of German medium tanks BZ.3 used by infantry. Summer 1941. The beginning and course of the second stage of the battle were complicated by the mistakes of Soviet intelligence. Front intelligence, Colonel Bondarev, believed that the Germans had only 2 to 3 divisions near Radekhof, while the Germans had a twofold superiority in manpower, artillery and complete aviation there. At the same time, until June 27, Soviet intelligence officers warned Commander 5 Potapov about the advancement of a large tank column from Brest to Kovel, and he, fearing a detour from the north, advanced the 22nd Mechanized Corps near Kovel, and the front headquarters through aviation there. Zhukov, learning about this, ordered Potapov to bend the right flank and cover Kovel. But the threat turned out to be false. These mistakes were costly, because they did not make it possible to timely understand the situation at the junction of our 5th and 6th Armies and diverted forces in the wrong direction. On June 26, Potapov decided to destroy the enemy and capture Dubno with strikes from the 9th and 19th Mechanized Corps in cooperation with the 36th Rifle Corps, TSAMO USSR, F. 229, Op. 3776, D. 60, L. 5, although the advanced parts of the Germans advancing in the Lutsk direction threatened its flank and rear. Faklenko and Rokossovsky, without getting involved in battles with them, delivered strong blows to the northern flank of the Kleist tank wedge. The Germans tried to stop the attacks of the 43rd Panzer Division of Colonel I. Sibbing, 19th MK, with barrages, but the tankers of the division, pushing the KV and T-34 forward, broke their anti-tank defenses, and the German infantry, abandoning their equipment, randomly retreated. The Germans failed to hold the advance of our tanks with fire from ambush. The vanguard of the 19th Corps attacked and drove the enemy from the rear. Also, the enemy's attempt to hold back our tanks on separate advantageous lines failed. Pursuing the Germans, the 19th Corps broke into the eastern outskirts of Dubno in the evening. The Germans blew up the bridges behind them, and only this did not allow the Soviet tankers to break into the city. German losses: 30 tanks, 50 armored vehicles, 4 anti-tank batteries, up to an infantry regiment killed, broken and abandoned motor vehicles. Our losses: 17 tanks, 128 men, killed and wounded. To the right, in the direction of Dubno, the 9th Mechanized Corps of Rokossovsky attacked the enemy. In this zone, the 13th and 14th Tank and 2 motorized divisions of Kleist and 3 infantry Ryakina advanced on Rovno. Despite the great superiority of the enemy, Rokossovsky's corps advanced several kilometers, but strong airstrikes forced him to stop. With continuous bombing, the Germans managed to pincer the 20th Panzer Division, but it escaped from them with a night counterattack. The 131st Motorized Division of Colonel N. Kalinin, defending in the Lutsk region, repelled several attacks of German tanks and repelled enemy attempts to force the river. STYR. Scheme 3. Counterattacks of the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front and the battles near Brody, Dubno, exactly June 26 to 29, 1941. Again, the tactical breakthrough was not exploited. The successful actions of the 43rd TD of the 19th MK were essentially nullified by the fact that the division, like other formations of the Corps, did not have the strength and means to consolidate on the captured lines. Artillery of the Corps, tractor-drawn at 6 km per hour, could not keep up with the tanks. In addition, the inconsistency in the actions of neighboring formations, which exposed the flanks of the 43rd TD, forced the commander Feklenko, instead of a night attack on Dubno, to withdraw the division to Rovno. At Radekhof and Brody, the 15th and 8th Mechanized Corps delivered a blow to the southern wedge in the direction of Berestechko. A difficult situation developed on the 15th. Having suffered losses, he was able to attack with only one 212th Motorized Division. The 8th TD from the 4th MK, allocated to help, arrived on June 26 only towards the end of the battle. And yet, in some areas, the 15th MK moved forward. The Germans, unable to withstand attacks on the ground, used their air superiority and threw aviation against the Soviet Mechanized Corps. Commander I. Karpezo was seriously shell-shocked at the command post. He was replaced by Colonel G. Ermoliev. The main blow to the southern wedge was delivered by the 8th Mechanized Corps of Lieutenant General D. Ryabyshev, schemes 4 and 5. He was opposed by the German 16th Panzer and 57th Infantry Divisions and motor units of the 48th Motorized Corps. The terrain for the offensive was difficult. It was intersected by 5 rivers 10 to 30 m wide and up to 2 m deep, with marshy floodplains up to 2 kilometers. There was little time for preparation, 5 night hours. There was no air support. At 9 a.m., the 8th Mechanized Corps attacked the enemy with 2 tank divisions, the 34th Colonel I. Vasilev and the 12th General T. Mishanin. The 7th Motorized Division provided a tank attack from the left. The commander controlled the battle from the KV tank. The 34th TD with the second attack, having crossed the log decks through the swampy terrain, completely defeated one enemy tank column and broke through to the rare Tesluchev area, where the Germans hastily organized anti-tank defenses. In this battle, the 34th TD destroyed 3 batteries, 2 motorized battalions, captured the composition of 2 battalions. 12th TD, 8th MK, having overcome the motorized infantry of the river Slanovka, captured Leshnev while destroying 12 German tanks, 3 anti-tank batteries, a motorized battalion, and captured the rear of the German division. The 7th TD of Colonel Gerasimov captured a bridgehead on the river Styr and, reflecting counterattacks, destroyed up to 15 enemy tanks, destroyed and captured up to 2 infantry battalions. The strike of the 8th MK, which advanced 25 kilometers, alarmed the German command. Rundstedt and Kleist urgently pulled up tank and infantry reserves to Berestechko, pulled together all the anti-tank artillery of the 48th Motorized Corps. The most powerful German tank in 1941 was the PZ.4. Its 75mm cannon penetrated 50mm armor at 500 m. German aviation continuously and massively bombed the advancing Soviet units, using a combustible mixture here for the first time. The command post of the 8th Mechanized Corps fell under the bombs. Many headquarters commanders were out of order, but the Corps was preparing to continue its offensive in the morning. At the end of June 26, the Military Council of the Front summed up the results of the counterattack. It turned out that the Mechanized Corps, introduced into battle separately and often without the support of infantry, artillery and aviation, detain and throw the enemy in separate directions, inflict considerable damage on the enemy, but also suffer heavy losses themselves. The enemy, using superiority and mobility, is advancing in other areas. There is a threat of invasion by tank columns in the Lutsk-Rovno and Radakovo-Brodsky directions. With the approach of the Soviet 31st, 36th and 37th Rifle Corps, the opportunity opens up to create a more powerful grouping. Perkave proposed to create it on the line of the rivers Stokhoda, Styr, and the cities of Dubno, Kremenets, Zolochev, and take the Mechanized Corps beyond this border. M.P. Kirponos, realizing that a temporary transition to the defense is indispensable, gave the order to withdraw. But Moscow reacted categorically to this. The headquarters forbids the withdrawal and demands to continue the counterattack. Kirponos' conversation with Zhukov ended with the latter's order, on the morning of June 27, go on the offensive and defeat the enemy who broke through to Lutsk and Dubno. Zhukov perfectly understood the intention of the headquarters of the Southwestern Front and the difficulties in organizing the strike, but the transition to the defense at a time when the Mechanized Corps showed success, and the Germans were in critical difficulty, seemed to him the worst option. It is difficult to say which of the decisions, to stop or continue the strike, was the most expedient in the situation of those days. However, when the General Staff received information about the losses of the Mechanized Corps, they plunged into amazement and made us think. The main reasons for the loss of tanks were not the actions of anti-tank artillery and enemy tanks, but air raids and numerous equipment failures. On the night of June 27, the 8th and 15th Mechanized Corps, having received an order, began to withdraw, but a new order caught up with them, to return and continue attacks in their previous directions. As soon as the commanders had time to detain the withdrawing units, a new order was received, the 8th, to advance directly on Dubno, connect there with the 9th Rokossovsky and the 19th Feklenko and close the Germans in a ring, and on the 15th to hit Berestechko with all his might. The crosshair of orders confused even the German generals. They could not understand why the 8th Corps, after a successful offensive during the day, suddenly retreated at night, and cautiously, with apprehension, other Russians preparing a trap, moved units of the 16th Panzer and 57th Infantry Divisions after it. Halder also guessed about this, writing on June 27, the Russian formations that attacked the southern flank of the Kleist group apparently suffered heavy losses, opposite Soviet light tanks BT-7. Their 45mm cannon allowed them to fight even the medium German PZ.3 and PZ.4. Despite all the troubles, the counterattack continued. On June 27, the 9th and 19th Mechanized Corps attacked the enemy between Lutsk and Rovno with the task of driving him back from Mlinov across the river Ikva. The supporting 36th Rifle Corps struck at Dubno. On the same day, German divisions also received orders to advance on Dubno and Rovno, and on June 27 to 30 the clash turned into a fierce oncoming battle with attacks, defenses and counterattacks from both sides. The 19th Mechanized Corps overturned the German units and again broke through to Dubno. This time from the south side. At the same time, the infantry of the 36th Rifle Infantry came out from the northeast to Dubno, and the 9th Rokossovsky in a defensive battle defeated the tank motorized column of the Germans, which was torn along the railway along the highway to Rovno. Commander of the 8th Mechanized Corps Ryabyshev was preparing to move the main forces of the Corps to Dubno from the southeast, but this was prevented by the intervention of a member of the Military Council of the Front, Corps Commissar N. Vashigin, who arrived at the Corps command post during the development of the strike plan. Accusing Ryabyshev of slowness, threatening to shoot him, he ordered immediately without preparation to create and move to Dubno a mobile group. The 34th TDI, Vasiliev, reinforced by a tank regiment, was hastily included in it. At the head of this group, he put N. Popel, political officer of the Corps commander of the 8th MK. The hasty order of Vashigin and the dismemberment of the Corps had tragic consequences, although the beginning of the group's actions was successful, thanks to the decisiveness of the commander of Colonel Vasiliev. On the evening of June 27, Having defeated German tank and infantry units in several battles, they quickly broke into Dubno, while our 19th Mechanized and 36th Rifle Corps entered the city. At Ostrog, the German motorized units that broke through and the 11th TD were held back in heavy battles by the Lukin Group. It was made up of units of the 16th Army, Commander General M.F. Lukin, who did not have time to depart for Smolensk on the orders of the headquarters. The battles of the Mechanized Corps on June 28 to 30th were the highest point of the tank battle, Scheme 6. The German Shock Arrow, the first tank group of Kleist, initially aimed at a victorious breakthrough on the move to the Dnieper, stomped around in the border zone for 8 days. Its 3rd and 48th Motorized Corps, advancing, found themselves in a critical situation. The highest headquarters received requests for reinforcements and reports of such losses, especially in tanks and motor vehicles, which now aroused astonishment not in Moscow, but in Berlin. Russian counterattacks against formations scattered on a stretched wedge often turned the Germans into a disorderly retreat from the battlefield. Soviet light tank T-26 Mod 1933-37 with a handrail antenna on a cylindrical tower. Halder noted on June 29, heavy fighting is still going on at the front of Army Group South. On the right flank, the 1st Tank Group of the 8th Russian Corps penetrated deeply into our position and entered the rear of the 11th Tank Division. This wedging of the enemy, obviously, caused a big mess in our rear in the area between Brody and Dubno, quite seriously interfered with the 11th, 16th TD, 16th MD, as well as the 44th, 11th, 299th Road, Diary, Volume Z, Book 1, p. 58. From the heights of the General Staff, big mess is a smoothed-down assessment of serious failures. Many facts, of course, known to Halder, were not named, about the defeat of many units, headquarters, losses in divisions, the death of 2 division commanders, about the flight of the commander of the aforementioned 11th TD at that time, General Milche, from the battlefield in a light aircraft. Another document represents the situation more realistically, Kleist's order, requiring the use of extreme measures in the troops. Rumors about Soviet tanks breaking through caused panic in the rear services. I order, by the necessary teaching, order and threat of punishment, point out the consequences of panic. Every instigator of the panic, under the field court. Officers are required to use weapons. I forbid using the words, tanks broke through, in case of alarm. At Hitler's headquarters, they perfectly understood the danger of the situation that had arisen for Army Group South. From the north, it was torn off from the center group by Marshy Policia, and from the south, from the Carpathians, it had an open, up to 400 kilometers, flank not occupied by the Hungarian and Romanian troops, allies of Germany. And if the Soviet command would launch an offensive from the Carpathians, then the position of Army Group South would become critical. Therefore, Rundstedt was urgently reinforced with reserves, transferring tank units, 6 infantry divisions, artillery regiments, anti-tank divisions, and motor vehicles to him. On June 28 to 30th, the command of the Southwestern Front decided to launch a general offensive in order to defeat the Dubno-Ostrog grouping of the enemy. It was supposed to be attacked from 3 sides. From the northeast, the 9th and 19th Mechanized Corps struck, from the southwest, the 8th and 15th Mechanized Corps and the 36th and 37th Rifle, from the east, Lukin's group. But the situation turned out to be more complicated than it seemed to the front headquarters. Scheme 3 and 4. Modernized tanks T-26 arranged 1938-40 with conical turrets and reinforced from 15 to 20 mm armor. Kleist and Ryakina, reinforced with reserves, stubbornly strove and hurried to break through the line of Soviet border fortified areas, beyond the Stalin Line, as the Germans called it. And our Mechanized Corps by this time had seriously lost their striking power. The 9th and 19th suffered heavy losses from air strikes and, under pressure from superior forces, retreated to Rovno. The 15th hardly held back the German onslaught. The 8th Mechanized Corps, which broke through in Dubno with its mobile group, when trying to move with the remaining forces, ran into strong anti-tank defenses. The Germans managed to intercept the road, cutting off the advance group from the main forces. Blocked near Rovno by 6 divisions, she fought for 6 days and almost all died during the breakthrough. The 22nd Mechanized Corps retreated to Kovel with heavy fighting. Group Lukin, which had only 1 tank regiment. BT-7 advances to positions along the forest road. The headquarters demanded to break the German group at Ostrog, Dubno, Rovno. In the order of the front of the 5th Army, the task was set to strike on July 1 from the north from the area of Tsuman, Stavsk, Kleven, and cut off the motorized mechanized group. From the south, from Ostrog, only the Lukin group could support the blow with counterattacks from defensive positions. Aviation was aimed at solving three tasks: strikes against the enemy in the areas of Dubno, Rovno, Ostrog, covering the concentration of their mechanized corps, and strikes at enemy tank wedges. The extremely exhausted 4th, 8th and 15th Mechanized Corps were withdrawn to the front reserve. The 87th and 124th Divisions, still fighting in the encirclement near the border, were given the order of the headquarters: leave the equipment, bury it, and break through to cover with hand weapons. Thus, the order unwittingly admitted that the offensive capabilities of the Mechanized Corps. The strikes of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, their tactical breakthroughs and successes were not brought to their logical end: the encirclement and defeat of the Kleist Tank Group. The command of the Southwestern Front lacked a clear organization of a counterattack, and therefore, despite the numerical superiority in tanks, there were not enough forces or reserves. But the actions of the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front do not end there. By July 9, the headquarters ordered the troops of the front to withdraw to the lines of fortified areas on the old border, until 1939. Thus, what MP Kirponos asked for on June 27 happened. The withdrawal of a huge mass of troops, with a deep wedging of enemy mobile troops into their orders, is a most complicated maneuver. Until mid-July, the Mechanized Corps provided cover for the withdrawal of the armies of the Southwestern Front, first to intermediate and then to the main positions: Korostan, Novograd-Volynski, Chepetovka, Starokonstantinovsky, Proskurov. The 9th Mechanized Corps repelled German attacks on the Lutsk-Riven Highway. 19th, stopped the enemy on the river Gorin and repelled attempts to advance along the Rovno-Novograd-Volynski Highway. The 15th covered the retreat of the 26th Army. The 4th and 8th at Zhytomyr covered the direction to Kiev. T-34 Mod. 1940, knocked out in the summer of 1941. Tanks of the first issues were armed with a 76mm L-11 cannon. The withdrawal of the SWF troops, which began on the night of July 2, took place in difficult conditions. On the same day, Rundstedt brought the 11th German, 3rd and 4th Romanian armies and the Hungarian Corps into battle. This blow from the south to the flank of the retreating Soviet troops was supposed to help the Kleist-Ryakinar grouping quickly break through in the Zhytomyr-Kiev direction and lead to the encirclement of the troops of the Southwestern Front. But an entry dated July 3 in Halder's diary testifies that the plans of the German command were constantly frustrated. This pursuit is constantly delayed by stubborn resistance from the enemy. Individual groups constantly go over to counterattacks, mostly to the flank of the advancing troops and, as a rule, with tank support. Opsit, Volume 3, Book 1, p. 77. At a time when the Wehrmacht command was puzzling over how to organize strikes in order to achieve their planned goals, at a meeting with Hitler, Keitel and Jodl were deciding whether Rundstedt could surround the armies of Kirponos. Hitler concluded the meeting with the conclusion that the Russian aviation and tank forces had already been defeated; it only remained to finish them off in the cauldron. The more knowledgeable Halder expressed cautious doubt, citing the Russians' solid leadership and strong counterattacks. And soon Hitler's strategists were convinced of the fallacy of their assumptions about a quick victory. On July 6, Rundstedt ordered Kleist to advance with the 3rd Motorized Corps through Novograd-Volynski to Kiev, and the 48th, to Berdichev. But the headquarters of the Supreme High Command and the command of the Southwestern Front unraveled the enemy's plan, and when the Germans broke through to Berdichev and Zhytomyr on July 6, the 9th and 22nd Mechanized Corps, together with the 31st Rifle Corps from the 5th Army, attacked in the direction of Novograd-Volynski and Marklevsk. In the first attack, a regiment of the 298th Wehrmacht Infantry Division was completely destroyed and the communications of the Kleist tank mechanized wedge were intercepted. The 19th Mechanized Corps, a group of the 43rd TD, motor units and artillery, attacked south of Novograd-Volynski near the Gulsk Cape and stopped the German columns moving along the highway Zhytomyr, Kiev on the river. Case. Rundstedt, who received a blow to the flank, was forced to hastily turn to the north. The large forces of the 6th Ryakinar Army, 7 infantry and 2 motorized divisions, removing them from the Kiev direction. The 15th Mechanized Corps, 10th TD of S. Bergertsov, drove the Germans out of Miropol, and the 24th Mechanized Corps of Chistikov, the last reserve of the front, counterattacked them on the Ternopol-Proskurov highway. Against the 19th Mechanized Corps, on July 5, Rundstedt, who replaced units of the Lublin Group, sent to the Western Front and against the 7th Rifle Corps, through 14 divisions, including tank and motorized. But when Kleist's tanks poured into the gap between Novograd-Volynsky and November Miropol, they were met by the combined detachments of the 4th and 15th Mechanized Corps. The consolidated detachments of the 15th were united into the Ogertsov Group, padded German PZ.IIC. In direct clashes with Soviet tanks or artillery, the losses among these lightly armed and lightly armored vehicles were especially high. The 3rd German Motorized Corps, 13th, 14th Tank and 25th Motorized Divisions, advanced against them, but our troops crushed the advance units of the Germans with a counterattack, defeated the headquarters of the 11th TD, and cut the highway November Miropol, Berdichev and advanced to Chudnov. At the same time, the front's aviation stopped Kleist's tank columns with massed attacks by bomber and assault regiments and forced them to take refuge in the surrounding forests. The fighting in the areas of Berdichev and Zhytomyr went on for a week and took on an exceptionally fierce character, about which Brauchitsch, returning from the front, reported to Hitler, plunging him into extreme irritation. Halder made 2 characteristic entries. July 12, a big battle broke out on the front of the 1st Panzer Group in the Berdichev area. The enemy throws into battle all the new formations, mainly mobile ones, which attack it from the southeast, south and southwest. And on July 15, the fighting in the Berdichev area, which in places was bloody, stubborn, is beginning to subside. 11th Panzer Division lost 2,000 men. Opsit, Volume 3, Book 1, pp 121 and 133. German General A. Philippi, after the war, noted that the Russians in the border battles against Army Group South constantly switched from defense to counterattacks and counterattacks, due to which our troops suffered heavy losses, up to 200 people per day per division. These battles ended the first and largest tank battle of the Great Patriotic War. Actions of Mechanized Corps. We must make a reservation. The name, Tank Battle near Brody, Riven, or you can add Lutsk and Dubno, is just a convention. In contrast to the well-known tank battle of 1943 near Prokhorovka, which took place rather compactly, in time and place, the tank battle of 1941 on the southwestern front turned out to be more scattered in time and space. It essentially consisted of the battles of individual mechanized corps, introduced into the battles in stages, as they advanced to the starting lines. Therefore, it is difficult to give a unified picture of the entire course of the tank battle in 1941. On the other hand, this picture will turn out to be incomplete if you do not highlight, at least in the main moments, the combat operations of each of the mechanized corps. They, who were in the stage of formation and rearmament. In these circumstances, which were constantly complicated literally from the first minutes of the attack, the entire personnel of the Mechanized Corps required exceptional courage and stamina. Our tankers not only withstood the blows of the enemy, but also inflicted such retaliatory blows on him that put him on the brink of defeat and ultimately frustrated his strategic plan to encircle and defeat the Soviet troops in the south. Scheme 4. Counterattacks of the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front near Novograd-Volynsky and Novy Miropol at the final stage of the tank battle in early July 1941. 22nd Mechanized Corps and 1st APTBR. The 22nd Mechanized Corps entered the battle in the first hours of the war and, on the orders of the commander MP Kirponos, delivered the first blows to the invading enemy. Scheme 2. On June 22 to 29, the Corps operated together with the 1st APTBR, Major General K.S. Moskalenko, recently formed, well-trained and located in the 5th Army Zone near Lutsk. Their unification took place in a somewhat unusual, but characteristic way for those days. Moskalenko, having opened the red package, saw an order to forcefully move to the deployment area of the 6th Army of Musichenko, which he reported to the commander, 5M, Potapov. But the situation on the morning of June 22 turned out to be extremely tense. The army divisions did not have time to turn around and advance towards Vladimir Volinsky, and the 22nd MK, scattered at a great distance, could not quickly assemble. His divisions, the 41st and 19th Panzer and 215th MD, were located 140 kilometers from the border. Potapov, having received an order from MP Kirponos to strike on June 23 on the enemy's flank, turned to Moskalenko. I ask you, finally, I demand to speak to Vladimir Volinsky and, together with the 22nd Mechanized Corps, destroy the enemy. The brigade commander found himself in a difficult position and replied, the brigade is part of the RVGK. Your demand is contrary to the mob plan and I cannot fulfill it. Potapov tried to get permission from Moscow or Kiev, but there was no connection, and then he ordered the brigade to act together with the 22nd. I take responsibility for the violation of the task provided for by the mob plan. And Moskalenko, also understanding what responsibility he takes on, decided to follow the order. These decisions could cost both dearly, but they benefited the cause. V.S. Tamruchi. These battles were distinguished by tactical originality and courage. On the march, the brigade caught up with a small column of the headquarters of the 22nd MK without troops. Commander S. Kondrusev reported, 19 TD and 215 MD will advance no earlier than in 1 to 2 days, and under bombing, therefore, losses are inevitable and the brigade is the only strike force. These are 6,000 fighters, 276, and 85 mm guns, 70 heavy machine guns. The whole brigade is on wheels, and this means speed, mobility, and maneuverability. Junkers piled up on the way, but not a single one of our planes. The brigade commander makes the only correct decision: the divisions disperse and move forward at top speed. Bombs rained down into the void. There were no losses. Halfway to Vladimir Volinsky, they ran into the Germans. It turned out to be the 13th, 14th Panzer and 298th Infantry Divisions. Directly against the brigade, 14th. There was a meeting battle without infantry, tanks, and aircraft cover. And German planes hung over the brigade, trying to press its crews to the ground. German officers inspecting a wrecked T-34 Mod. 1940. The presence of such a powerful tank in the armored forces of the Red Army was a complete surprise for the Wehrmacht. This battle, K. Moskalenko recalled, was exceptionally terrible in terms of fire tension. The Germans, after a short air and artillery preparation, threw 200 tanks into the attack at top speed. The brigade did not have time to dig in, but quickly turned around. Kondrusev and Moskalenko occupied the NP on a high-rise. All orders have been issued. Now everything is decided by discipline, stamina, skill in gun crews, initiative and self-control of division and battery commanders. Enemy tanks rushed ahead. A pitch hell of fire and smoke, ammunition bursting in tanks, flying pieces of cars and motorcycles swirled. In the valley along the highway to Lutsk, the corpses of German motorized infantry blackened. The fighters of the brigade are also dying, the guns, broken and crushed, fall silent. But there is no order to retreat, behind Lutsk. The commander of the German 14th TD stubbornly attacked in the forehead. What did he hope for? Maybe for that the Russians could not stand it and would begin to retreat, as was often the case in the West, or, perhaps, due to the weakness of the barrier, but the Soviet brigade commander managed to echelon the batteries in depth. In the battle near his KV tank, S.M. Kondrusev was mortally wounded. He was replaced by the Chief of Staff, General V.S. Tamruchi. Slow-moving tractors could not keep up with the tanks, so the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front often found themselves without artillery support. The battle ended in the evening. The Germans left dozens of tanks and armored vehicles, dozens of guns, cars and hundreds of corpses in front of the positions. Brigade losses, 3 batteries with personnel. To cover the Lutsk highway, suitable units of the 22nd MK and the 1st APTBR took up positions near the Zaturtsi metro station. The commander of the German 14th TD acted more carefully this time, demonstrating false attacks in the center, on the right flank. Finally, he built a tank wedge with PZ.4 in front and went on the offensive. The profitability of the formation is indisputable. Powerful PZ.4s cover the entire battle formation and flanks with armor, followed by PZ.3s and light PZ.IIS, then motorcyclists and motorized infantry on armored personnel carriers with mortars and guns. However, the brigade commander Moskalenko made his own maneuver. The brigade dug in, disguised itself, and the German commander, without reconnaissance, did not suspect that he was rushing straight into the anti-tank area. 3 successive lines covered the highway to Lutsk and approaches to it for 4 to 5 kilometers on both sides with direct fire. 2 battalions were left in reserve, and 2 more battalions of 122 and 152 mm howitzers from the artillery regiments of the 22nd MK and the Rifle Corps. The German wedge first tried to cut through the center of our positions. Moskalenko wrote, "There were much more tanks and infantry than yesterday. There were so many of them that it seemed that the whole Nazi Germany was moving towards us. I confess that a vague anxiety took possession of me. Can we hold out this time? Have our fighters been taught everything? But the gun crews carried out the order of the brigade commander with accuracy, let the tanks go 300 to 400 meters, and unleashed a flurry of fire. The stunned Germans mixed up, began to deploy tanks, substituting the sides. After the second attack at top speeds with motorcyclists and infantry, up to 50 tanks and armored vehicles, a mess of broken guns and motor vehicles remained on the battlefield. Then the commander of the German 14th TD decided to throw the main forces against the left flank of the 1st APTBR. But even here he was met by the deadly fire of the brigade reserve and howitzers. 5 times the Germans tried in vain to outflank our positions. At the critical moment of the battle, when it seemed that German tanks were about to break through to Lutsk, they were attacked by units of the 19th Panzer and 215th Motorized Divisions of the 22nd MK and the 135th Infantry Division. 3 Soviet divisions faced 5 German ones. Their attacks were distinguished by a furious pressure. The Germans retreated, leaving behind heavy equipment. After the second attack at top speeds with motorcyclists and infantry, up to 50 tanks and armored vehicles, a mess of broken guns and motor vehicles remained on the battlefield. Then the commander of the German 14th TD decided to throw the main forces against the left flank of the 1st APTBR. But even here he was met by the deadly fire of the brigade reserve and howitzers. 5 times the Germans tried in vain to outflank our positions. At the critical moment of the battle, when it seemed that German tanks were about to break through to Lutsk, they were attacked by units of the 19th Panzer and 215th Motorized Divisions of the 22nd MK and the 135th Infantry Division. 3 Soviet divisions faced 5 German ones. Their attacks were distinguished by a furious pressure. The Germans retreated, leaving behind heavy equipment. After the second attack at top speeds with motorcyclists and infantry, up to 50 tanks and armored vehicles, a mess of broken guns and motor vehicles remained on the battlefield. Then the commander of the German 14th TD decided to throw the main forces against the left flank of the 1st APTBR. But even here he was met by the deadly fire of the brigade reserve and howitzers. 5 times the Germans tried in vain to outflank our positions. At the critical moment of the battle, when it seemed that German tanks were about to break through to Lutsk, they were attacked by units of the 19th Panzer and 215th Motorized Divisions of the 22nd MK and the 135th Infantry Division. 3 Soviet divisions faced 5 German ones. Their attacks were distinguished by a furious pressure. The Germans retreated, leaving behind heavy equipment. Then the commander of the German 14th TD decided to throw the main forces against the left flank of the 1st APTBR. But even here he was met by the deadly fire of the brigade reserve and howitzers. 5 times the Germans tried in vain to outflank our positions. At the critical moment of the battle, when it seemed that German tanks were about to break through to Lutsk, they were attacked by units of the 19th Panzer and 215th Motorized Divisions of the 22nd MK and the 135th Infantry Division. 3 Soviet divisions faced 5 German ones. Their attacks were distinguished by a furious pressure. The Germans retreated, leaving behind heavy equipment. Then the commander of the German 14th TD decided to throw the main forces against the left flank of the 1st APTBR. But even here he was met by the deadly fire of the brigade reserve and howitzers. 5 times the Germans tried in vain to outflank our positions. At the critical moment of the battle, when it seemed that German tanks were about to break through to Lutsk, they were attacked by units of the 19th Panzer and 215th Motorized Divisions of the 22nd MK and the 135th Infantry Division. 3 Soviet divisions faced 5 German ones. Their attacks were distinguished by a furious pressure. The Germans retreated, leaving behind heavy equipment. They were attacked by approaching units of the 19th Panzer and 215th Motorized Divisions of the 22nd MK and the 135th Rifle Division. 3 Soviet divisions faced 5 German ones. Their attacks were distinguished by a furious pressure. The Germans retreated, leaving behind heavy equipment. They were attacked by approaching units of the 19th Panzer and 215th Motorized Divisions of the 22nd MK and the 135th Rifle Division. 3 Soviet divisions faced 5 German ones. Their attacks were distinguished by a furious pressure. The Germans retreated, leaving behind heavy equipment. The German command, convinced of the impossibility of a breakthrough to Lutsk along the highway, was looking for workarounds on the flanks through Torchin and Usyk. The brigade, together with parts of the Mechanized Corps and the 135th Rifle Division, deployed the first echelon at Torchin, the second at Usyk, and the third at the outskirts of Lutsk. The Germans became even more cautious. They no longer climbed blindly, they constantly bombed Soviet positions in groups of 30 to 40 aircraft. However, their attacks were not successful. According to our information, the enemy lost 19 tanks near Torchin, another 20 near Usyk. Then the German command made an attempt to bypass Lutsk from the north and south, forcing the river Styr. By this time, in a counterattack on Vladimir Volynski, the 22nd MK suffered heavy losses. Its 19th TD lost almost all of its T-26 and many commanders. The 41st TD of the Corps was dispersed and began to be used battalion by battalion to support the attacks of rifle divisions and individual units. Destroyed German PZ.3 armed with a 50mm cannon. The main tank of the German armored units in 1941. On June 25, the brigade, on the orders of Potapov, moved to the Rozhizh area, provided a crossing over the river Styr. Units of the 22nd MK and the 27th Rifle and June 28 to 30 participated in the liquidation of the German bridgehead in the Rozhizh area. The brigade, of course, represented a powerful strike force in a tank battle. The actions of the gunners were distinguished by courage and steadfastness. The commander of the gun, P. Tugin, who was left alone, knocked out the 5th tank at close range with the last shell. There was nothing to hit on the 6th, and Tugin died under its tracks along with the gun. Sergeant N. Moskolev burned several tanks and, having received a mortal wound, managed to pull the cord and knocked out another one. This happened at the positions of the battery of Lieutenant A. Logvinenko, and a curious incident was also recorded there. When the surviving German tanks turned back, the battalion commander, a major, got out of the wrecked one, stood, swaying, apparently stunned and dazed, and then strode towards our lines. He was taken to Moskolenko, and after a long silence, the German officer said that he did not expect such a rebuff from the Russians. "And you are still counting on victory?" Moskolenko answered him. "No, your Führer will not see her. Personally, you have already seen this." The stubbornness and strength of the brigade was also recognized by the commander of the German 14th TD. In his order, he wrote that the division suffered terrible losses from artillery fire. The Germans threw leaflets into the brigade with threats, "Do not expect mercy," and pointed out that this also applies to those who will be taken prisoner. In the operational summary of the 5th Army No. 9 dated June 29, it was noted, in the period from June 23 to 27, the 1st Anti-Tank Brigade repeatedly fought with enemy motorized infantry, artillery and tanks. In total, 150 enemy tanks were destroyed and knocked out during this period. Archive of the USSR Ministry of Defense, F. 229, Op. 161, File 166, L. 16, even taking into account the fact that all the belligerents in their reports usually 2 to 3 times exaggerate the losses of the enemy. This is not a bad result. Destroyed Soviet tanks, medium T-28, in the foreground, and light BT-7. Summer 1941. 15th Mechanized Corps. The 15th Mechanized Corps of Major General I. Carpeza was part of the Southern Group, which attacked the Kleist tank wedge from the south. It was considered relatively complete, consisted of 933 tanks, including 64 KV tanks and 72 T-34s. But there were practically no vehicles in the building. 212th Motorized Division, the Corps turned out to be on foot. Of the 8 radio stations in the state, there were only 2. On June 22, the Alarmed Corps received an order from MP Kirpenos, in cooperation with the 4th MK, to strike at parts of the German 48th Motorized Corps, which were moving from Sokol to Radekov. A few hours were allotted to prepare for the offensive, and the commander began to advance divisions scattered in a 70-kilometer strip of wooded and swampy terrain. 10th, to Radekov, 37th and 212th, to other sections. The non-transport 212th, with all the forcing, could arrive in the initial area only after 2 days. Meanwhile, the advanced units of the German 48th Motorized Corps, with the support of bomber aircraft, were approaching Radekov, dropping paratroopers there. The Germans mercilessly bombed parts of Carpezo on the march, and Carpezo bombed the headquarters of the front with requests to allocate at least 20 to 30 vehicles for the transport of ammunition, fuel, and food. Carpezo. And yet Carpezo preempted the commander of the 48th. On the 22nd, the Soviet commander managed to transfer an advance detachment of 2 battalions to Radekov, which at 8 o'clock in the morning entered the battle, destroyed the landing force and organized defense in the Radekov region. On the morning of June 23, the Germans, having created an overwhelming superiority, attacked our detachment. The battalion commanders, hiding the tanks in the folds of the terrain, chopped the columns mainly from the spot, and when the ammunition ran out, they retreated somewhat to the south. German losses according to our data: 20 tanks, 16 anti-tank guns, about 20 vehicles with motorized infantry. Detachment losses: 6 tanks, 20 armored vehicles, 7 people killed. The battle of the detachment was not supported by the infantry and artillery, which were still on the march. Carpezo, not being able to simultaneously concentrate divisions on attack positions, was forced to bring them into battle in parts, which did not bring a decisive turning point. Operations were also complicated by the lack of accurate data about the enemy, about his main forces and the direction of attacks. Because of this, in the first hours, the 37th Panzer received the task of destroying a group of German tanks in the Adama area, where, as it turned out later, there were no tanks. The division lost 6 hours of combat time in vain and suffered unjustified losses on the march. The front headquarters gave the commander information about 2 or 3 German divisions. In reality, there were 2 times more of them. The commander of the German 48th Motorized Corps sought to crush the divisions of the 15th Mechanized Corps with triple superiority. Stubborn tank battles went on day and night. The Mechanized Corps not only held back the enemy's tank onslaught, but threw them back with bold counterattacks. The fighting reached its peak on the 25th of June. The 10th Tank Ogatsova fought for the 3rd day, without sleep and rest. The commanders of the regiments of the 20th Tank and 10th Motorized Rifle Colonels Terliansky and Sinitsyn, with the support of the 10th Howitzer Regiment, carried out a counterattack in the morning and forced the enemy to go on the defensive. Own losses: 4 kV and 7 BT. By order of Zhukov and Kirpinos, the 15th Mechanized Corps, which suffered heavy losses, was reinforced by the 8th Tank Division from the 4th MK. According to the plan of the tank counterattack, he, together with the 8th Mechanized Corps, struck in the direction of Berestechko. But there was a discrepancy: the 8th Panzer did not have time to approach by June 26. The arrived representative from the 8th MK, N. Popel, Carpezo, said, "The Corps tightly grappled with the enemy, the 3rd day in the battles, the losses are great. The order of the front is known, but the front headquarters, apparently, does not know the position of the Corps. Only 1 10th Division will be able to participate in the strike, the other 2, or rather what is left of them, are involved on a wide front." And he concluded, "I understand the meaning of the operation and its design. With great joy, I would, together with you, hit the fascist group under a sigh, but..." And yet, on June 27 to 28, the attacks of the 10th, approaching 8th and 212th Divisions on the flank of the 8th MK played a significant role in the fact that the German 48th Motorized Corps was in a critical situation. The Germans could not withstand the counterattacks of units of the 15th Mechanized Corps and in some areas were thrown back by 8 to 10 kilometers. A multi-turreted T-28, knocked out in the summer of 1941. In total, about 120 of these tanks were in the 4th and 15th Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front. Very negatively affected the actions of the Corps, command castling, frequent change of tasks. On June 24, by order of G.K. Zhukov, the Corps was ordered to withdraw from the battle near Radekov and concentrate southwest of Brody for an attack on Dubno along with the 8th MK. They began to withdraw, but on the morning of the 25th a new order was received, to return and prepare an attack on Radekov, Sokol in cooperation with the 4th. The tanks turned back. A few hours later, Zhukov, who returned from the troops to the headquarters of the front, demanded the cancellation of this order, counting on the morning of the 27th to launch a powerful counterattack with 2 corps in the Brody area. An order to return followed, despite any difficulties and the technical condition of the equipment on June 28, advance in the direction of Berestechko. But what can be ordered to people cannot be demanded from the material. It simply went out of order, turning into scrap metal. In addition, the Corps lost its commander, who fell under a bomb explosion. An amazing thing happened. Commander Carpezo was considered dead and buried. But soon he returned to the command post with the advanced political officer I. Lutai. Shocked by the death of a friend, he was beside himself. Is Carpezo dead? I do not believe. Dig up the grave. He was reassured, persuaded. It did not help. Ripped up. And, saying goodbye to his friend, Lutai caught warmth in his body and a weak pulse. The commander was sent to the hospital. Subsequently, Carpezo made many more military cases. Combat operations of the 15th Mechanized Corps ended in July in consolidated detachments, reduced to the Ogertsov group, smoking T-28 on the side of the road. A large number of these tanks failed for technical reasons and were destroyed by their own crews. 8th Mechanized Corps. The 8th Mechanized Corps, Commander, Lieutenant General D. Ryabyshev, Political Officer, Brigade Commissar N. V. Popel, Chief of Staff Lieutenant Colonel A. V. Sinchenko, was almost completely manned, consisted of 932 tanks, including 169 of the latest KV and T-34, the remaining 763 old designs with a motor resource of no more than 500 kilometers, and about 200 of them needed factory repairs. The actions of the Corps during the battle were the most successful and most dramatic. D. Ryabyshev. The outbreak of the war did not take him by surprise. As early as June 20th, by order of the Kovo headquarters, all tanks of the 8th MK received refueling and ammunition. At 0415, Army Commander 26 Kostenko warned, "Be ready. Wait for the order," and at 4.30 Chief of Staff Vorenikov reported the attack and warned, "Do not succumb to provocations. Do not open fire on enemy aircraft without an order." The call came just at the time of the enemy air raid on Drohobych. Bombs rained down on the city, on the barracks of the Mechanized Corps, on the railway station. Ryabyshev, after hanging up the phone and after a few seconds of hesitation, gave the order, the anti-aircraft gunners to open fire. Only the regiment of Colonel Gerasimov's 7th Motorized Division suffered from the raid, 70 killed, 120 wounded, which did not receive an order to leave in time. The Corps immediately fell under the crosshair of conflicting orders of the headquarters of the 26th and 6th Armies and the front, and during June 22 to 25 made senseless, forced marches, Scheme 5. On June 22, Kostenko, assuming a German attack on Sambir Ternopil, ordered the Corps to concentrate at Sambir, 80 kilometers from Drohobych. On the way, the advanced detachment of the 34th TD, Colonel I. Vasilev, together with the 42nd Division of General G. Sherstyak, repelled an attempt by the Germans to cross the river San, completely destroying their tanks and motorized infantry. At 20.00, the divisions reached Sambir, but at 20.40, an order was received from the front commander MP Kirpanos to concentrate east of Lvov in the Kuro-Vysviniki region and become subordinate to Commander 6 Musichenko. The completed 80 kilometers march lost its meaning. The Corps turned back, but before it had even reached the designated area, Musichenko received an order, changing direction to 180, to concentrate by 12 o'clock on June 23 at Yavrov and on the morning of the 24th, together with the 6th Rifle Corps, push the Germans beyond the state border. At 17.00, the advanced detachment of one of the divisions of the 8th MK entered Yavrov, and an hour later at 18.00 Ryabyshev received another order from the front headquarters, concentrate east of Lvov, in the Brody area, and in cooperation with the 15th MK from the morning of the 24th of June 1941. Attack and destroy enemy tanks in the direction according to the situation. The Corps turned back, and by nightfall at 23.00 German tanks broke into Yavrov. In the Brody area, and in cooperation with the 15th MK from the morning of June 24, 1941, attack and destroy enemy tanks in the direction according to the situation. The Corps turned back, and by nightfall at 23.00 German tanks broke into Yavrov. In the Brody area, and in cooperation with the 15th MK from the morning of June 24, 1941, attack and destroy enemy tanks in the direction according to the situation. The Corps turned back, and by nightfall at 23.00 German tanks broke into Yavrov. Scheme 5. March of the 8th Mechanized Corps from June 22 to June 25, 1941. For 3 days the Corps tossed about in the enchanted triangle Strylov Przemysl. This was the result of the inconsistency in the decisions of the higher headquarters, which proceeded from the expected actions of the enemy, and were constantly late in assessing the situation until the front command aimed the corps at a frontal attack. The corps was losing men and equipment in grueling force marches under bombardment and in minor skirmishes with the enemy. On the morning of June 23, the 7th MD, with the help of 2 battalions, destroyed a parachute assault force that was trying to capture Stryai, a junction of railways and highways. And that Yavorovo column of German tanks with motorized infantry and a motorcycle battalion collided with the 34th TD. The Germans confidently walked with their headlights on, highlighting themselves as targets. The division commander, Colonel IV Vasilev, placed batteries on both sides of the road and fired at the column point blank. Before the march to Brody, the 8th MK found itself in a difficult position. People fell off their feet, drivers fell asleep at the wheel. A technical inspection of material was required, but the rear fell behind. Refueling, to spare. The route is through Lvov, where enemy units are already operating. Komka Ryabyshev had to cut the knots, now it is 5.00, to speak at 10.00. All fuel and lubricants, forward detachments. The main force is to wait for refueling from the rear. Lions cannot be avoided. Vasilev, 34th TD, to move from Lviv to Busk, Brody, Mishanin, 12th TD, and Gerasimov, 7th MD, on Kurovitsa by the southern road. Ensure the motorcycle battalion passes through the region of Lvov. For 2 days, commanders and fighters saw through the noisy tactics of German submachine gunners, counting on fright and panic. In Lviv, there was a fight with them, and even with local nationalists who settled in attics and basements. In Busk, they defeated the advanced detachment of the German Motorized Division, which did not expect a meeting with Russian tanks. Commander of the 8th MKD, Ryabyshev, and political officer N. Popel over the map. June 1941. The corps reached Brody on June 25, having lost up to 50% of tanks and a significant part of artillery on the roads. On the spot, the corps commander did not receive any information about the enemy, and the vague task, to strike in the direction of the situation, apparently, assumed the organization of reconnaissance by the corps itself. In a short night, scant information was collected. The neighbor on the left, the 15th MK, could attack with only 1 division, the other 2 held back the German offensive on a wide 70 kilometers front. The neighbor on the right was not expected. The promised air division did not arrive. The front of attack is a wooded and swampy area, crossed by 5 rivers with swampy banks of 2 to 3 kilometers. You can't imagine worse for tanks. But the regiment of the 7th MD, with a sudden night attack, captured a bridgehead on the banks of the river. Elephants. It seemed that the enemy did not expect the Russians to recklessly advance through the swamps. In such circumstances, General Ryabyshev decided on June 26 at 9.00 to attack the enemy in the direction of Berestechko, Mykolaiv, Scheme 6. The blow was unexpected for the enemy, but the attack of Soviet tanks was met with dense fire and air raids in groups of 40 to 50 aircraft. The command post of the corps fell under the bombs and many commanders were out of action. The offensive of the 34th and 12th Panzer Divisions developed successfully. Destroying and capturing the opposing units, they took Leshnev, the main anti-tank center. The 34th reached the approaches to Berestechko. The German Motorized Corps 48, having suffered heavy losses, retreated to the right bank of the river Plyashovka and went on the defensive. The commander of the 34th TD, Colonel I. Vasilev, gave a critical assessment of the organization of the battle. The offensive is organized disgustingly. I'm not criticizing, I'm stating. Especially since disgusting applies to me. The corps headquarters itself did not know and did not inform us either about the enemy or about the neighbors. Where is the promised aviation? The task was set for me hastily, and I also set it in a hurry. The offensive began without reconnaissance, without artillery preparation. My right flank is open, but it turned out that there were units of cavalry and infantry nearby. They had never even heard of our offensive. I ask you to contact them, to oblige them to interact. The division could advance 40 kilometers and lose half as many people and equipment. How was the battle won and how successful was it? We hit the flank of the German regiments, hit the tail of the 11th and the head of the 16th Tank Divisions. I understood, decides the pace. Don't let them come to their senses, turn around, regroup. Reap and reap. They let the infantry go forward, it knocked down their covers, conducted reconnaissance, that's the interaction. On June 26, Ryabyshev gave the order to continue the offensive on the morning of the 27th, sent a report, believing that the commander would decide to build on the success. But again there was a discrepancy in the organization of the counterattack. On June 27, at 4 a.m., an order was received to withdraw the 8th MK to the front-line reserve, to the rear of the 36th Corps, to the line of Kremenets, Podkamen. They began to hastily withdraw the divisions from the battle. But at 6 o'clock, 40 minutes, a new order arrived. The 8th MK from the morning of the 27th advanced from the Brody area in the direction of Dubno and captured Dubno by evening. The day ended in the worst way, with tragic consequences for the Corps. T-34, abandoned on the street of Lvov. 34s were distinguished by an unreliable transmission. A spare gearbox with side clutches, which often failed, was tied to the engine compartment of the tank. June 1941. After constant waste returns, the Corps consisted of 3 isolated groups. Regrouping, reconnaissance, and replenishment were required. The headquarters began to develop a plan of attack on Dubno from the starting positions of Rudnikovzin. The battle order is in 2 echelons, in the first, the 34th and 12th TD, in the second, the 7th MD. The main blow along the highway Brody, Dubno. It took at least a day to prepare. But during the development of the plan, the unexpected happened. At 9 o'clock in the morning, N.N. Vashigin arrived at the command post of the Corps with the prosecutor, the chairman of the tribunal, and a platoon of fighters. A difficult scene ensued, which was the result of command confusion and the leadership style of some of the top commanders of the Red Army. N. Popel left a testimony about her in the book, In a Difficult Time. N.N. Vashigin apparently belonged to the type of bosses who personified the infamous L. Meklis, with straightforward logic, not noticing the complexity of the situation and suspecting treason and sabotage in any doubts and delays. Vashigin did not listen to the report of the commander, but, approaching, angrily threw out a phrase that stunned everyone: "How much did you sell for, Judas?" Ryabyshev's attempt to speak was stopped. "The field court will listen to you, traitor. Here, under the pine tree, we will listen and shoot." Vashigin also interrupted Popel's attempt to intervene. "Ah, it's you, a staff lawyer with a traitor." But Popel still managed to besiege a member of the military council, N.N. Vashigin. He writes, "I used his own weapon, unsubstantiated accusation." Then there was no conscious reception. Anger prompted, it is still unknown what considerations are guided by those who, by order, forced them to give up the territory taken by battle to the enemy. Vashigin seemed to stumble, confusion slipped through his voice. "Who ordered you to give up the territory? What are you grinding?" Ryabyshev, report. Having barely listened to the report, Vashigin orders, "Report your decision in 20 minutes. Ryabyshev reported 20 minutes later, "The Corps will be able to complete the regrouping only by tomorrow morning." Vashigin, after 20 minutes, "The decision, and forward." Ryabyshev, "What's next?" Vashigin, "I order you to immediately start the offensive. If you don't start, I'll remove you from office, I'll put you on trial." And he dictates the order himself, and signs in such a way that ink splashes fly. So the suicidal decision was made to bring the Corps into battle piecemeal. Literally on the move, a mobile group was created, the 34th TD of Colonel Vasilev, the 24th TD of Lieutenant Colonel Volkov, from the 12th TD, and the 27th Motorized Regiment. The group included about 200 tanks and up to 9,000 men. Vashigin, leaving the command post, ordered, "Popel will be in command of the mobile group." And, turning to him, he added, "If you occupy Dubno by evening, you will receive a reward. If you don't take it, we will expel you from the party and shoot you." T-35 from the 8th MK, abandoned on the sidelines for technical reasons. These formidable-looking multi-turreted heavy, breakthrough tanks, turned out to be practically useless in the new highly maneuverable war of engines. The group was practically commanded by I. Vasilev. His breakthrough in Dubno is distinguished by the boldness of his decision, to hit the rear of the Germans suddenly. Performed on June 27 at 14:00. In the first echelon, Volkov's tank regiment marched. In the second, Smirnov's tank regiment beat along the railway and highway. the tank Bolkovitina bypassed Dubno southwest and west, and a heavy KV company with a motorized battalion closed the ring east of Dubno. The calculation was justified. The enemy on the front line was taken by surprise. The Germans were sunbathing, and many rushed to their tanks, guns, and into the trenches in their shorts. They were destroyed quickly, without even slowing down the movement of the columns. After a short time, they overtook the regimental and rear columns of the enemy 11th TD. The careless Germans mistook our tanks for their own, and after a few minutes of battle they were finished. Enemy batteries hit from the outskirts of Werber, but the divisional commander ordered, "Do not get involved. Forward. Until they come to their senses." The battle with the main forces of the German 11th TD unfolded on a wide rye field. The battle was fierce and bloody. Regiment Commander I.D. Bolkovitin died, firing from a burning tank until the last minute, but the blow of his 34s and KV decided the outcome of the battle. German General Milche, commander of the 11th TD, barely managed to fly away by plane, and his staff, headed by the chief, was taken prisoner. A curious document was found in the headquarters briefcase, characteristics for the commanders of the Southwestern Front, from the regiment and above. A record was found about Vasilev, an outstanding Russian colonel. Having familiarized himself, he remarked, "Today we will give them a light." The characteristic obliges. A group of our tanks broke into Dubno at night. The Germans rolled back. The city was littered with the corpses of the enemy, and the day came hot. They mobilized the population for cleaning. Scheme 6. Combat operations of the 8th Mechanized Corps near Brody and Dubno from June 25 to June 30, 1941. In anticipation of the approach of the main forces, the mobile group took up defensive positions near Dubno. There was no communication with his own or with other corps. A battalion was formed from 30 captured tanks and batteries from 50 guns. The Germans soon came to their senses, surrounded the group in a semicircle, pulled up their 16th TD, accumulated at Granovka and Verb, attacked, but to no avail. German tanks captured during the fighting were used in a peculiar way. On the night of June 29, a captured battalion from PZ.3 and PZ.4, quietly attached to the column of the German 16th TD, shot it from the inside. The captured colonel, head of the operational department of the corps, testified, "The Germans shot their own tanks and vehicles all night. The division was taken to the amendment." This battle was carried out by commanders I. Gurov and U. Novikov. Communication with the body could not be established. Later it became known, Ryabyshev sent a convoy with fuel and lubricants and shells to Dubno, but some commander of the cavalry division turned it around. "You are crazy, the Nazis have long been in Dubno." On the 6th day, our plane was shot down near Podlusia, but the wounded pilot managed to report, "The order of the front was carrying you, the messes attacked, destroyed it." I remember the content. Up to 300 tanks are concentrated in the forests near Mala Milch and Belk Milch. Most likely without fuel and shells. The front commander ordered them to be destroyed. In the meantime, the Germans pulled up forces and cut off the Popol-Vasilev group from the main forces of the 8th MK. At Mlinov, Taika and Podlusia, the group fought off 5 to 6 attacks a day, defeated the regimental column, captured the commander and headquarters of the 44th Infantry Division. But the group was surrounded by 3 infantry, 44th, 111th and 225th, 2 tank, 14th and 16th, and 1 motorized, 16th, enemy divisions. Popol and Vasilev gathered a military council. The Chief of Staff, Major Kurpin, offered to break through to the east, and the regimental commander, Major Sitnik, suggested that they follow the order. Vasilev, having rejected a dozen options, decided, the route, to Ternopil, at 23.00 to break through a gap near Taika and advance the rear column with the wounded there, at dawn, attack the 16th Tank Division of the Germans in the forests and make their way in the direction of Kozin, somewhere near Sitno and Brody. There was the 8th Mechanized Corps, German PZ.IIG with 50mm gun. A small white circle with a cross on the side of the tank indicates that the vehicle belonged to the 13th Panzer Division of the Wehrmacht. Summer 1941. This was the last battle, a night break through a narrow corridor. In the first echelon there are 80 tanks, each with the last 20 to 25 shells, half a tank of fuel. The paratroopers on the armor have the last handful of cartridges. They hit with 2 columns, the left, Volkov, the right, Sitnik. The German tank regiment from the 16th TD was taken by surprise. They were sleeping in the forest. They hit point blank, for sure, the projectile was a tank. Crushed several batteries. The paratroopers captured a 3-battery division and deployed it against German tanks. Sitnik reported, "Let Hitler count how many tanks in the forest will burn." When dawn broke, the German commanders recovered from the shock, surrounded the entire area, sent planes, wave after wave, tanks literally in a solid wall. Our tanks and the howitzer division of E. Novikov hit them. The shells ran out, the tankers went to ram. Sitnik rammed 3 enemy tanks, his HF turned into a pile of iron rags. The wounded Volkov barely got out of the burning T-34 and fell unconscious. It was as if people lost their nerves, the instinct of self-preservation disappeared, they stopped noticing bombs and shells, got out of tanks, jumped out of trenches and, without bowing their heads, went forward until a bullet or fragment fell off. In this battle, the commander died. Before the next attack, he rose from the KV tower and, pointing the direction to his tanks, threw his hand forward. And so the outstanding Russian colonel I.V. Vasilev remained in everyone's memory in the last minutes of his life. At the same instant, the tank was hit by an 88mm enemy anti-aircraft gun, the only German gun capable of penetrating the KV armor. According to D. Ryabyshev, in the battles near Dubno, the group destroyed up to 200 enemy tanks, dozens of guns and mortars, hundreds of motor vehicles, defeated the headquarters of 2 divisions and several units. Only killed Germans lost up to 2 regiments. But the group itself suffered heavy losses. The tanks and equipment left without fuel and ammunition had to be destroyed by ourselves. 1,000 people died in the battles, 5360 went missing. Some of them were captured, some made their way in separate groups to their own. By July 24, one of the groups of 1,700 people was brought out by N.K. Popel in the city of Nishin. Breaking through, she defeated 2 headquarters columns and several marching units. The heavy Soviet KV tank was too tough for German anti-tank artillery, but the tank suffered from a weak undercarriage and could not withstand long passages. Many HFs, like this one, had to be abandoned on the roads due to minor breakdowns. The breakthrough to Dubno was not developed. Order shakeup delayed the regrouping of the remaining forces of the 12th TD Mishanin and the 7th MD Gerasimov. Regiments of the 12th came to the bank of the river Sitenki, and the 7th to Kozin, Plyashev. The advanced detachment of the 7th MD moved after the Popel-Vasilev group approached Verba, but then something unexpected happened for our and German troops. A column of Germans, also advancing on Dubno, crashed into our advanced regiment, the units mixed up and, mutually destroying each other, stood up on the defensive along the banks of the river Plyashovki. At the same time, the 7th MD met strong resistance at Kozin, where the Germans pulled up the 75th Infantry and units of the 16th TD, artillery regiments and aviation. In a fierce battle that lasted all day, the 7th MD destroyed 20 tanks, 8 guns, 188 vehicles, an infantry regiment, but could not knock the Germans off the highway and break through to the group I.V. Vasilev. June 28, Ryabyshev learned about the new order of the front. A mortally wounded pilot landed over Sitno in the evening. Literally on his last breath, he managed to say, "I was carrying an order." Destroyed. The general offensive was cancelled. The commander, without knowing the content and the new task, decided at his own peril and risked to break through to Dubno. But the Germans tightly plugged the gap with artillery, went around through the flanks uncovered by their neighbors. Enemy aircraft suppressed anti-aircraft cover, bombed a convoy with ammunition. Ryabyshev decided to withdraw the regiments to Brody, take up a tough defense and, having put the infantry on tanks, he himself led the breakthrough. The hit was successful. Although the Germans opened frenzied fire, the commander did not allow the columns to stop, the tanks crushed the enemy's guns, the infantry widened the passage. Major General T.A. Mishanin died in this battle. Colonel Nestorov, who replaced him, was unable to command the division, lost contact with the regiments, did not take the assigned line. At night, together with the confused political officer Vilkov, he rushed off to the front headquarters in Ternopil. There they reported in panic about the death of the corps. N.N. Vashigin was also present. Without waiting for the end of the report, he turned pale, left the office and shot himself. What pushed him to such an extreme act? the severity of conscious guilt, fear of punishment, conscience, is difficult to answer this question. And at this time, Ryabyshev, late at night, having let the last platoon through the neck, caught up with the columns abandoned by Nesterov, in which rumors the generals surrendered, were already walking, and put the regiments on new defensive lines. Without waiting for the end of the report, he turned pale, left the office and shot himself. What pushed him to such an extreme act? The severity of conscious guilt, fear of punishment, conscience, is difficult to answer this question. And at this time, Ryabyshev, late at night, having let the last platoon through the neck, caught up with the columns abandoned by Nesterov, in which rumors the generals surrendered, were already walking, and put the regiments on new defensive lines. Without waiting for the end of the report, he turned pale, left the office and shot himself. What pushed him to such an extreme act? The severity of conscious guilt, fear of punishment, conscience, is difficult to answer this question. And at this time, Ryabyshev, late at night, having let the last platoon through the neck, caught up with the columns abandoned by Nesterov, in which rumors the generals surrendered, were already walking, and put the regiments on new defensive lines. Soon the 8th MK was transferred to the front reserve and he began to withdraw with the front headquarters to Proskirov, Zhytomyr. At Kazetin, the corps withstood another battle with the enemy. The regiments, burrowing into the ground, stopped the tanks and motorized infantry of the enemy, rushing to Kiev. The corps was disbanded, the administration of the 38th Army was formed on its basis, Ryabyshev was appointed its commander, and N.K. Popel, a member of the military council. The only German gun capable of penetrating the armor of Soviet KV tanks was the 88mm Flak 18 anti-aircraft guns. 9th Mechanized Corps. The 9th Mechanized Corps, Major General K.K. Rokossovsky, consisted of about 300 tanks in the 35th TD, Major General N. Novikov, and the 20th TD, Colonel M. Kartukov, of which 175 BT, 111 T-26, the rest, floating T-38 and T-40, armed only with a machine gun. The 131st Motorized, Colonel N. Kalinin, like artillery, was transportless. Many tanks of the corps had already clearly served their time. For example, there were 24 BT-2 and 61 BT-5, and were more training than combat vehicles. The new tanks were expected to be received by the 15th of July. The raising of the corps on alarm was complicated by unforeseen circumstances. The commander had to take responsibility for decisions that, due to his rank, he had no right to make. On June 22, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, a telegram was received, but for some reason from the headquarters of the 5th Army, and not Kovo, opened the secret package. This could be done only by order of the chairman of the Council of People's Commissars or the People's Commissar of Defense, and there was no longer any connection. Rokossovsky gathered advice, and the package was opened. Task: the corps to move in the direction of Lutsk, Riven, Kovel. But there was an insignificant number of vehicles in the corps, and there were central warehouses and a garrison fleet nearby. And again the order of the commander: open the warehouses, pick up transport and ammunition. At 14:00 the corps set out. Rokossovsky looked with bitterness and anxiety at the old Pateshki and T-26. Will they withstand the march and battle? Infantry, planted on tanks and vehicles, with overload, moved in rifts. The tanks made stops in anticipation of the infantry. The soldiers from the next line of unloading waved 50 kilometers on foot, carrying light and heavy machine guns, 50, and 82mm mortars and ammunition. And all this under merciless bombing. Heat and exhaustion forced us to shorten the crossings to 30 to 35 kilometers. In the package directive, a task was set for a full-blooded full-time corps. The option of a sudden outbreak of war and entry into battle at the stage of formation and rearmament was not envisaged. But most of all, the lack of communication with the headquarters of the front and with the neighbors, the uncertainty of the situation, oppressed me most of all. Through the envoys, it was established that the 19th Mechanized Corps of N. Feklenko was advancing from the left. Fighters from the next line of unloading waved 50 kilometers on foot, carrying light and heavy machine guns, 50, and 82mm mortars and ammunition. And all this under merciless bombing. Heat and exhaustion forced us to shorten the crossings to 30 to 35 kilometers. In the package directive, a task was set for a full-blooded full-time corps. The option of a sudden outbreak of war and entry into battle at the stage of formation and rearmament was not envisaged. But most of all, the lack of communication with the headquarters of the front and with the neighbors, the uncertainty of the situation oppressed me most of all. Through the envoys, it was established that the 19th Mechanized Corps of N. Veklenko was advancing from the left. Fighters from the next line of unloading waved 50 kilometers on foot, carrying light and heavy machine guns, 50 and 82 mm mortars and ammunition. And all this under merciless bombing. Heat and exhaustion forced us to shorten the crossings to 30 to 35 kilometers. In the package directive, a task was set for a full-blooded full-time corps. The option of a sudden outbreak of war and entry into battle at the stage of formation and rearmament was not envisaged. But most of all, the lack of communication with the headquarters of the front and with the neighbors, the uncertainty of the situation, oppressed me most of all. Through the envoys, it was established that the 19th Mechanized Corps of N. Veklenko was advancing from the left. Designed for a full-time corps. The option of a sudden outbreak of war and entry into battle at the stage of formation and rearmament was not envisaged. But most of all, the lack of communication with the headquarters of the front and with the neighbors, the uncertainty of the situation, oppressed me most of all. Through the envoys, it was established that the 19th Mechanized Corps of N. Veklenko was advancing from the left. Designed for a full-time corps. The option of a sudden outbreak of war and entry into battle at the stage of formation and rearmament was not envisaged. But most of all, the lack of communication with the headquarters of the front and with the neighbors, the uncertainty of the situation, oppressed me most of all. Through the envoys, it was established that the 19th Mechanized Corps of N. Veklenko was advancing from the left. The 131st MD was the first to reach Rovno. Her army commander, 5 Potapov, immediately subduing him temporarily, ordered to take up defense along the river Styr on the Lutsk-Mlinov section. This was done through Rokossovsky's head. The main forces of the corps moved south of Rovno. K. Rokossovsky. It was not without difficulty that they clarified the situation, sometimes even using dubious sources. The 19th MK was advancing on Dubno, the 22nd was fighting north of Lutsk. So the 9th Mechanized Corps entered the battles. Kalinin's 131st Motorized Division destroyed German tanks and motorized infantry, which had crossed the river, with dense artillery fire. And beat off attempts at a new crossing. The 35th TD of Novikov threw back a column of enemy tanks and infantry moving towards Rovno. The actions of the 20th TD turned out to be very successful. These days, it was practically commanded by Colonel V. Chernyev, since M. Kartukov was in the hospital for an operation on June 22 and, with unhealed sutures, caught up with the division already on the march. The 20th, after a grueling march, attacked units of the German 13th TD on the move, catching them at a halt. 24 guns of the artillery regiment of Major S. Yuriev shot German tanks and infantry with direct fire. The attacks of the motorized rifle regiment turned into hand-to-hand combat. According to M. Kartukov, 60 German tanks were destroyed, among which, in addition to the usual PZ.2, PZ.3 and PZ.4, there were Czech Skodas, apparently PZ.35, T, or PZ.38, T, ORF, French, Renault, apparently R35, ORF, Schneider Kreuzot, ORF. And even English tankettes, Carden Lloyd, floating, like our T-38, ORF. But our 20th TD also lost 33 BT. Analyzing the results of the battle, M. Kartukov came to the conclusion that it was inappropriate to use weakly armored, Bateshki, in direct attacks. Tank BT-2 with the turret turned back. By 1941, these tanks were clearly outdated, but they were still part of the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front. The bitter lesson was not in vain. It was this battle near Kleven, wrote Kartukov, that first made me think about the issue of the widespread use of tank ambushes. This tactic subsequently, in the battles near Oral, helped us, with small forces, inflict serious damage on Guderian's 24th Corps. Since June 25, the main forces of the German 13th and 14th TDS with infantry and motorized units have piled on the 9th Mechanized Corps. What could Rokossovsky oppose to them? He later recalled, all that a corps commander could do with a very small number of tanks was to rely on artillery. So I did. Having 7 years of experience in the First World War and the Civil War and understanding the weakness of his tank forces, Rokossovsky focused on the combined artillery strike. Massed artillery fire, especially the new 85mm cannons, knocked out enemy tanks, and sudden attacks by our tanks and infantry at critical moments of the battle threw the German infantry away from the Rovno-Lutsk highway. On June 27 to 30th, the situation on the northern flank of the front escalated sharply. The Germans increased pressure and advanced infantry divisions to help their tank and motorized divisions. The 22nd MK moved away from Lutsk, the 19th was stopped near Dubno. The position of the 9th was not the best. Rokossovsky received an order from the front to launch a counterattack on the flank of the enemy group that had broken through. But when he arrived at the 20th TD, he saw something that made him prepare not for an offensive, but for defense. From the southwest, columns of German tanks, artillery, armored vehicles and motorized infantry moved one after another towards Dubno towards Rovno. Once again, Rokossovsky took responsibility for a decision that formally contradicted the order for an immediate offensive. With a clear superiority of the enemy, it would result in the destruction of the main forces of the corps. In those swampy places, the Germans with their tanks and heavy equipment mostly moved along large and hard roads. Therefore, the commander of the 9th MK covered the line on the Lutsk-Rivne highway of the 35th Novikov TD. He also transferred the 20th TD with its artillery regiment of 85mm guns here. Chief of Staff Maslov and Chernyev quickly carried out the maneuver. The guns were placed in ditches, and some of them were placed right on the highway. The Germans were approaching in a rhombus, in front, motorcycles, behind them, armored vehicles and tanks. The gunners of the corps let them in as close as possible and hit at once, point blank. A monstrous traffic jam was instantly formed on the highway from the wreckage of motorcycles and armored vehicles, corpses. But the tail of the column continued to roll by inertia, crushing its own and increasing the confusion. German tanks swept to the sides, substituting the sides for smashing shots. At the end of the battle, the commander of the 35th TD, Novikov, threw our tanks into the attack and, pursuing the Germans, occupied the dominant heights a few kilometers from the crossroads. The German commanders, not risking moving further along the highway, called the Junkers, but already knowing this stereotyped option, our troops took refuge in forests and trenches. A captured German staff colonel testified during interrogation, "Your artillery is excellent and the spirit of a soldier is on top." So, defending and counterattacking, the 9th Mechanized Corps acted. Halder wrote, on July 1, west of Rovno, a deep wedging of Russian formations from the Pinsk swamps into the flank of the 1st Panzer Group followed. But the forces of the 9th Corps were fading. The retreating units, which had lost contact with their units, became a source of replenishment. They were put into operation. The unusual situation forced them to resort to unusual tactics. M. Kartukov testifies, "The Germans were terribly afraid of our artillery and T-34 tanks, and we began to change the position of the batteries every day, creating the impression of a large artillery group, and the vehicles, sheathed with plywood and painted, turned into 34s, and the Germans did not climb through." In early July, the corps fought on the river Styr, saddling the road to Zhytomyr, covered the withdrawal of the Fifth Army to the line of fortified areas and participated in a counterattack near Novograd-Volinsk. German soldiers inspect a wrecked Soviet combat training tank BT-2, which has only machine guns. Western Ukraine, June 1941. 19th Mechanized Corps. The 19th Mechanized Corps, Major General N. Feklenko, was mainly equipped with old-style tanks. In the 40th TD, there were 19 T-26 and 139 T-37s. In the 43rd TD, there were 5 KVs, 9 T-34s, and 230 T-26. Tank Regiment of the 213th MD, 55 light tanks. There were 13 armored vehicles. Like all mechanized corps, the 19th experienced the same difficulties with vehicles and traction for artillery. N. V. Feklenko. On the example of the actions of the 19th and 8th Mechanized Corps, perhaps, the inconsistency between the orders of the headquarters of the front and the armies in organizing a tank counterattack is most clearly visible. On June 25, according to the front plan, the 19th and 9th Mechanized Corps, Northern Group, delivered the first blows in the Rovno region and drove back parts of the German 48th Motorized Corps. The 9th MK advanced towards Dubno, the 19th went to the outskirts of the city. But the Southern Group, the 8th and 15th Mechanized Corps, could not advance that day and maintain success. On June 26, the 19th crushed the right flank of the German 11th TD, defeated its tank regiment along with motor units and again went to Dubno, but neither Feklenko nor his headquarters knew that on the same day, inflicting heavy losses on other divisions of the German 48th Motorized Corps. The 8th Mechanized Corps of Ryabyshev is advancing towards the 19th. On June 27 to 28, the 19th MK and the 36th Rifle Corps again advanced in the Dubno direction and again reached the approaches to Dubno, and reconnaissance detachments were 8 to 10 kilometers west of Dubno, but the front headquarters was belatedly informing Feklenko and Ryabyshev that a group of Popol Vasilev, from the 8th MK, had already broken into the city. The directive of the front headquarters critically noted that the 36th Rifle, 8th and 19th Mechanized Corps did not have radio communications during the attack on Dubno. Not only radio communications were lacking. On the night of June 27 to 28, Feklenko reported to the front headquarters about the confusion with the supply of the corps, the acute shortage of ammunition, fuel, food, the complete absence of spare parts and the inability to take out the wounded. Losses of equipment due to malfunctions, even minor ones, exceeded combat losses. Destroyed Soviet tanks. In the foreground is AT-26 Mod. 1932 Southwestern Front, June 1941. Despite all the difficulties, the Corps achieved success in battles by the dedication of the fighters, the operational resourcefulness of the commanders. The 43rd Panzer Division of Colonel I.G. Sibing and its advanced detachment, Commander, Captain V. Arkhipov, acted especially effectively. On June 25, Arkhipov's battalion discovered a column of light tanks with a regimental headquarters and 2 columns with fuel and ammunition, and completely destroyed them at night. The fiery night deprived Kleist's 11th and 13th Panzer Divisions of fuel and shells. On June 27, the battalion, bypassing Dubno from the northwest, discovered a tank regiment, about 120 tanks, of the 11th TD with motorized infantry units. Chybin decided to defeat the enemy with a sudden blow from the front and rear. But in anticipation of the delivery of fuel and shells for their regiments, the strike, scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning, had to be repeatedly postponed. Finally, at 4 p.m., a double blow by our tanks against the Germans took place and ended in the complete defeat of the enemy divisional grouping. Its remnants rolled back to Rovno, and our 43rd Division reached the outskirts of Dubno. The actions of the Corps ended with participation in strikes near Novograd-Volinsk, Ostrog, and at the turn of the Korostensky UR. A German soldier inspects a Soviet BT-5 tank. There is no visible damage to the car. Perhaps the tank was abandoned by the crew due to a technical malfunction. Conclusion. When evaluating the results and significance of the first tank battle, the question immediately arises why the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front, having an impressive numerical superiority, could not stop and destroy the Kleistreich strike force. The answer, in our opinion, lies in the reasons of a strategic and operational tactical nature. A large literature is devoted to the strategic reasons for the defeat of the Soviet troops in the summer of 1941. Let's touch on only a few related to our topic. In the Plan for the Defense of the State Border of 1941, an outdated view of the beginning of the war was initially laid down, which did not provide for a massive first strike of the enemy at once by all the main forces, already mobilized and deployed in all main directions. As they say, they were preparing for the past war, on the model of the First World War, and the new one broke out. Moreover, our enemy already had 2 years of practical experience in the new war, and we talked about it only theoretically. This is the reason for the suddenness of the German attack. Our covering armies and mechanized corps did not have even an hour of time to deploy a counterattack grouping. It was already being created under fire, under the advancing pressure of the enemy's mobile troops. The delay of the Stavka with the operational preparation of the covering armies had a disastrous effect. The assumption of the command of the Kovo about the main attack of the Army Group, South, on Lvov was erroneous, because of which the most powerful 4th and 8th Mechanized Corps were away from the enemy strike force. But the main reason that predetermined our operational tactical failures was the technical and personnel incompleteness of the reorganization of the Soviet tank forces, although even in the cash state they delivered such blows to the enemy that they put him in a critical situation. These reasons were revealed as early as 1941, as evidenced by the analytical reports and certificates of the Armored Directorate, ABTU, of the NPO of the USSR. The failures of the Mechanized Corps of the Kovo, SWF in the Battle of Brody, Dubno, Rovno are a vivid example of the fact that victory is achieved by no means by the presence of equipment in the troops itself and not by its quantitative superiority. The whole set of qualitative indicators is more important. In particular, the constructive and technical level of weapons, their readiness and renewable resource, the degree of mastery of them by personnel, methods of tactical use, as well as the correspondence of weapons to methods of control and forms of organization of troops, etc. For all these qualitative indicators, the advantage at the beginning of the war was on the side of the Germans. The organization and composition of the mechanized corps of the Kovo did not meet the requirements of combat operations. Tank units were armed with different types of vehicles, multi-turreted T-35 and T-28, infantry, T-26 and cavalry, BT, floating T-38 and tankettes T-27. The movement, maintenance and joint use of this motley mass in battle caused numerous difficulties. Obsolete models of tanks with an exhausted resource coexisted and fettered the use of the latest KV and T-34. About 700 of these new tanks were scattered among different divisions and could not have a turning point in the course of the battle. Combined into one fist, the KV and T-34 could be used to great effect. They did not have time to organize technically equipped rear services in the corps. According to the reports of the commanders, more than 50% of the tank fleet failed for technical reasons, often still on marches. In addition, the recruiting staff did not have time to fully master the technique. The mechanized corps were not completely mechanized, one-sidedly. The lack of transport often doomed our tankers to go on the attack without the support of motorized infantry, artillery, to inactivity due to lack of fuel, lack of ammunition. The lack of a repair base, spare parts, and means of evacuating tanks, coupled with the unpreparedness of the crews to eliminate even minor malfunctions and damage in the field, led to huge non-combat losses exceeding combat ones. An extract from the political report of the Southwestern Front dated July 8, 1941 is indicative. In the 22nd MK, July 22 to July 6, 1941, 46 vehicles and 119 tanks were lost, of which 58 were blown up by our units during the withdrawal due to the inability to repair on the way. The losses of HF in the 41st TD are exceptionally high. Of the 31 CVS, 9 CVS remained on July 6. Hit by the enemy, 5, blown up by crews, 12, sent for repair, 5, built tanks BT, 7, which are under repair. The number of combat-ready tanks in the Mechanized Corps of the Southwestern Front on June 22, 1941 was about 85% of the total. There were cases when the crews could not fix the malfunctions of the tanks and undermined them. There have been cases, is a stretch, when 5 were knocked out in battle and 12 were self-destructed, then this is already a sad practice which is confirmed by similar data on other corps. In the 8th TD of the 4th MK out of 316 tanks for 2 months, combat losses amounted to 85 tanks, and not combat, 138, and 107 were self-destructed. According to the 10th TD of the 15th MK, out of 44 T-28s, 4 were knocked out, and left during the withdrawal, that is, at best, rendered unusable by the crews, 37, out of 147 BTs, respectively, 54 and 46. During the month of hostilities, thousands of our pre-war tanks turned into scrap metal. In July, the forces of the Mechanized Corps were exhausted. According to information from the headquarters of the Southwestern Front, on July 22, 1941, half of all tank divisions consisted of 1 to 2,000 people each, 40%, 3 to 5,000 people each, and 10%, for 10 to 16,000 people. Of the 12 divisions, only 2 had 118 and 87 tanks each. In the rest, just a few tanks. The above facts make it possible to correct the multiple tank superiority of our Mechanized Corps over the German ones. On June 22, there were about 3,894 tanks in 6 corps, 10% less were alerted, about 3,500, 50% reached the positions. Therefore, about 1,750 tanks entered the battle directly. But even this number during the very first battles continued to melt before our eyes due to the impossibility of evacuating and repairing armored vehicles. Therefore, the quantitative superiority of the Soviet armored forces turned out to be very ephemeral, and the enemy had superiority in other indicators. The Germans quickly restored their broken and battered divisions with reserve tanks, motorized equipment and trained crews, while our Mechanized Corps, without receiving reinforcements, turned their divisions into consolidated detachments. Another group of reasons for our failures are shortcomings in the organization and management of combat operations. The subordination of the Mechanized Corps to the armies came from the outdated tactics of using tanks as rams of positional warfare. Such a view deprived tank formations of operational independence. The army headquarters were completely unprepared to manage large independent mechanized formations and used them in purely army interests, to support infantry, to eliminate landings, to plug holes, throw them into frontal attacks on prepared defenses. Reconnaissance in the interests of the tank troops was not carried out at all. The capabilities of the equipment of the Mechanized Corps and the peculiarities of their tactics were not taken into account. An illustrative example is from the 41st TD of the 22nd MK, which on June 22, according to the mob plan, went to cover from the direction of the main attack of the Germans. At the same time, the command of the Mechanized Corps itself did not have sufficient experience in leading large and independent tank formations. They included quite a few commanders with combat experience, but the latter were few in combined arms, not tank. Therefore, they, like the headquarters, staffed mainly by combined arms commanders who had not previously served in tank units, did not fully possess the operational tactical horizon specific to tank troops. Hence the shortcomings and blunders, frontal attacks on strong, undisrupted groupings instead of deep roundabout strikes against their weak points, communications and rear areas. The desire to act immediately and directly prevailed over prudent calculation and went to the detriment of maneuverability. Burnt BT-7 on the side of the road. Due to the inability to evacuate damaged equipment, our tankers had to self-destruct it so as not to give it to the enemy. The desire of many commanders, characteristic of 1941, to inspire by personal example, also had a negative effect. Instead of organizing firm control from their command posts, keeping in touch with neighbors and headquarters, the commanders themselves rushed into battle, to the advanced units, gave instructions, not knowing how the battle was developing, acted as they thought boldly and decisively, and often in harm to yourself and your neighbors. In addition, such impulses gave a large number of losses of command personnel. Thus, it turned out that although the Mechanized Corps fought boldly and attacked the enemy decisively, their headquarters were inefficient and the commanders had no communication between themselves, and often delivered blind strikes. A certain share of responsibility for failures lies with the headquarters and the front command. The directive of the People's Commissar No. 3 of the 22nd of June 1941 on the counter-offensive against Lublin, adopted with the consent of IV Stalin, was clearly impracticable. G.K. Zhukov notes that in setting this task, neither the Stavka nor the front command knew the real situation and proceeded from the mere desire to be active without taking into account the capabilities of the troops. The front command, with all its firmness and strong-willed perseverance, made a number of mistakes and miscalculations in organizing a tank counterattack. Haste in decisions, with an almost complete lack of information about the situation, led to frequent changes in tasks and abundance of conflicting orders, and put the Corps in a difficult position. The biggest miscalculation of the command was the lack of interaction across the front. Once again, the badly organized communication should be noted out of hand. On June 26 to 30th, the 8th and 19th Mechanized Corps and the 36th Rifle Corps twice and very deeply, for 30 kilometers, and the forward detachments for 10 to 12 kilometers, crashed into both flanks of the German 48th Motorized Corps. At the same time, our 34th TD from the 8th MK broke into Dubno and, not knowing about the breakthrough to Dubno of the 19th and 36th Corps, fought there for 5 days, pulling 6 German divisions. For the German command, the strike and breakthrough turned out to be unexpected. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. On June 26 to 30th, the 8th and 19th Mechanized Corps and the 36th Rifle Corps twice and very deeply, for 30 kilometers, and the forward detachments for 10 to 12 kilometers, crashed into both flanks of the German 48th Motorized Corps. At the same time, our 34th TD from the 8th MK broke into Dubno and, not knowing about the breakthrough to Dubno of the 19th and 36th Corps, fought there for 5 days, pulling 6 German divisions. For the German command, the strike and breakthrough turned out to be unexpected. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. On June 26 to 30th, the 8th and 19th Mechanized Corps and the 36th Rifle Corps twice and very deeply, for 30 kilometers, and the forward detachments for 10 to 12 kilometers, crashed into both flanks of the German 48th Motorized Corps. At the same time, our 34th TD from the 8th MK broke into Dubno and, not knowing about the breakthrough to Dubno of the 19th and 36th Corps, fought there for 5 days, pulling 6 German divisions. For the German command, the strike and breakthrough turned out to be unexpected. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. The 19th Mechanized Corps and the 36th Rifle Corps twice and very deeply, for 30 kilometers, and the advanced detachments for 10 to 12 kilometers, crashed into both flanks of the German 48th Motorized Corps. At the same time, our 34th TD from the 8th MK broke into Dubno and, not knowing about the breakthrough to Dubno of the 19th and 36th Corps, fought there for 5 days, pulling 6 German divisions. For the German command, the strike and breakthrough turned out to be unexpected. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. The 19th Mechanized Corps and the 36th Rifle Corps twice and very deeply, for 30 kilometers, and the advanced detachments for 10 to 12 kilometers, crashed into both flanks of the German 48th Motorized Corps. At the same time, our 34th TD from the 8th MK broke into Dubno and, not knowing about the breakthrough to Dubno of the 19th and 36th Corps, fought there for 5 days, pulling 6 German divisions. For the German command, the strike and breakthrough turned out to be unexpected. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. At the same time, our 34th TD from the 8th MK broke into Dubno and, not knowing about the breakthrough to Dubno of the 19th and 36th Corps, fought there for 5 days, pulling 6 German divisions. For the German command, the strike and breakthrough turned out to be unexpected. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. At the same time, our 34th TD from the 8th MK broke into Dubno and, not knowing about the breakthrough to Dubno of the 19th and 36th Corps, fought there for 5 days, pulling 6 German divisions. For the German command, the strike and breakthrough turned out to be unexpected. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. Their tanks were far away from the infantry, and cutting off and encircling the German panzer divisions was quite possible, but the operation was not brought to its logical end, in fact, due to the lack of communications. Weak coordination on the part of the front headquarters, mutual ignorance led to the isolation of the actions of the Soviet Mechanized Corps, to strikes without taking into account the general operational situation. In the very first hours, the headquarters and the command of the Southwestern Front faced an unexpectedly powerful enemy strike in terms of scale and concentration, but they showed restraint and the will to actively resist. Having determined the direction of the main German attack, the Soviet command aimed our troops at defeating, first of all, the enemy's tank motorized grouping, capable of rapid breakthroughs and crushing defenses to great depths due to its maneuverability and firepower. Chief of the General Staff G.K. Zhukov, who took part in organizing the counter-offensive on June 23 to 26, believed that, in the current situation, by the end of June 22, only counterattacks by Mechanized Corps against the wedges of enemy armored forces could be the only correct one. The command of the SWF did not have a unanimity of opinion on the operational feasibility of an immediate counterattack by Mechanized Corps. Perhaps the plan to evade the German strike and withdraw our troops to the line of the old border, proposed by Percave, could turn out to be a better option. It is hardly possible now to give an unambiguous assessment of this. Faced in practice with German mobile formations, and with the tactics of deep tank breakthroughs, detours and coverage used by them, the Soviet command could not immediately find effective ways to counter them. Throwing into the counteroffensive those who did not have time to complete the formation and rearmament of the Mechanized Corps, the Soviet command, apparently, did not fully realize what heavy losses a counterattack could turn out to be for them. The unfolding war clearly did not fit into outdated ideas about it. The first tank battle, despite all the mistakes and miscalculations, was of great importance for the entire initial period of the war. Although the Soviet command failed to defeat the 1st Panzer Group von Kleist, the enemy plan was thwarted. The Germans did not succeed in encircling and destroying the troops of the southwestern and southern fronts on the right bank Ukraine on time. The German General Butler assessed the actions of Army Group South as follows: motorized German formations have never managed to enter the operational space or bypass the enemy, not to mention the encirclement of any significant Russian forces. Army Group South failed to carry out the planned breakthrough. Between Army Groups South and Center, bogged down in July in battles, the first near Kiev, the second near Smolensk, a dangerous gap formed, opening up the possibility of strikes on their flanks. In the Blitzkrieg, the first crisis came. As early as July 4, Hitler spoke about turning the main strike formations from the center group to the south and temporarily abandoning the attack on Moscow, the main military political goal, while noting that this will be the most difficult decision in this war. Thus, the first tank battle of the Great Patriotic War, which unfolded near Brody, Dubno, Rovno, had a significant impact on the entire strategic situation in the center and on the southern wing of the Soviet-German front. The attack of the T-34 is supported by the calculation of the 45mm anti-tank gun. Summer 1941. Illustrations. Soviet light tank T-26 mod. 1938 weight, 10 tons, crew, 3 people, armament, 45mm cannon and 7.62mm machine gun, armor, 18mm, speed, 30 km/h, engine, 95 horsepower, cruising range, 200 km. Soviet light tank BT-7 mod. 1937 weight, 13.8 tons, crew, 3 people, armament, 45mm cannon and 7.62mm machine gun, armor, 22mm, speed, 52 km/h, engine, 500 horsepower, reserve course, 375 km. Soviet medium tank T-34 mod. 1941 weight, 28 tons, crew, 4 people, armament, 76mm cannon and 2 x 7.62mm machine guns, armor, 45mm, speed, 55 km/h, engine, 500 horsepower, cruising range, 300 km. Soviet heavy tank KV-1 mod. 1941 weight, 47 tons, crew, 5 people, armament, 76mm cannon and 2 x 7.62mm machine guns, armor, 75mm, speed, 34 km/h, engine, 600 horsepower, cruising range, 200 km. German light tank PZ.IB. Weight, 6 tons, crew, 2 people, armament, 2 x 7.92mm machine guns, armor, 13mm, speed, 40 km/h, engine, 100 horsepower, cruising range, 145 km. German light tank PZ.IIF. Maca, 9.5 tons, crew, 3 people, armament, 20mm cannon and 7.92mm machine gun, armor, up to 30mm, speed, 40 km/h, engine, 140 horsepower, cruising range, 145 km. German medium tank PZ.IIG with signs of the 13th Panzer Division of the Wehrmacht. Weight, 21 tons, crew, 5 people, armament, 50mm cannon and 2 x 7.92mm machine guns, armor, up to 50mm, speed, 40 km/h, engine, 265 horsepower, cruising range, 145 km. German medium tank PZ.IVD, weight, 22 tons, crew, 5 people, armament, 75mm cannon and 2 x 7.92mm machine guns, armor, 30mm, speed, 42 km/h, engine, 300 horsepower, cruising range, 200 km. Thank you for downloading the book from the royalib.com free e-library, http://royalib.com. Leave a review about the book, http://Bylinin_Sergei/Tankavoe_Rovino_Gini_1941_G.html. All books by the author, http://royalib.com/author/Bylinin_Sergei.html.